Welcome to the Pro Football Network live 2024 NFL Draft Preview. My name is Dallas Robinson. His name is Ian Cummings. Ian, the NFL Draft is basically here. We're 24 hours away. We're right down to the nitty gritty. How excited are you for this day to finally be here?
Man, I'm very excited for multiple reasons. One, just kind of being able to take a breath, right? That's the biggest thing. The draft cycle, for those of you who watch it, kind of from an exterior focus, it's a lot of information day in and day out. And for me, trying to cover everything, and I feel like this was a really productive cycle across the board for the entire team. So props to everyone here at PFN for really making that possible. But it is a lot of information, and especially in the March and April months, a lot of misinformation as well. You clashing reports, you can't tell what's real, what's not. And we'll get into that a little bit with our top 10 focus, but it's going to be great. We've been speculating. We've been doing a lot of mock drafts, guys. Like, it's unhealthy amount of mock drafts. But, those have a purpose, right? It's not just noise. It's about exploring those different outcomes that could occur. But now we're finally on the doorstep. And Dallas, I'm telling you, I'm so excited to actually know what's going to happen. Like, just have the outcome, just have the results so we can review, right? Like, that's the biggest thing. We're finally there. Most draft cycles, it gets to a point where you're just ready for that to happen. So very excited for that, but also very excited to see what these teams do, because I think this class in particular has a very strong blue chip talent group at the top. There's a core of like 12 or 15 players that are really high on my grading scale. And then I think the round one range is really strong. I think there's depth in the day 2 and day 3 ranges, a lot of opportunities at multiple spots for teams to really improve their rosters and improve their culture core. So a lot of opportunity at stake, and I'm excited to be here talking with you once again. We got 24 hours left to go.
Before we get into it all, I do want to say, if you're not mock drafted out like Ian and I might be, go after months and weeks and all that of doing mock drafts, go to the PFN mock draft simulator and do as many as you can between now and tomorrow. It's the best mock draft simulator on the market. You can do trades, you can do mock drafts with your friends, you can try and figure out how round one is going to go tomorrow, which is what we're going to try and do here tonight too. And as soon as round one is over, you can do more mock drafts of round 2, round 3, the rest of the draft. As soon as this Saturday draft is over, as soon as round 7 is over, you can do 2025 mock drafts. Ian will have a 2025 mock draft out this weekend as well. Mm-hmm. We're going to have tons of coverage over the next couple of days, Ian, of the draft, of how it affects NFL, how it affects college, how it affects, everything around the league. So please do come check out everything we've got at Pro Football Network. Now, let's try and make sense of how round one is going to go on Thursday night, Ian. And I think
we can try. I don't know if we're going to. We can try.
This top 10 to me is just, it has the potential to go like absolutely insane. Like we know how number one is going to go, right? Everyone knows Caleb Williams is going to be the number one pick. He basically is a Chicago Bear as we speak. Number 2, it feels like Jaden Daniels is the answer there, but we're not sure. From there on out, I mean, it feels like a multiple choice test. We just don't know. We have no idea how it's going to go. It feels like the potential to get crazy here with trades, with quarterbacks, with the high-end wide receivers. The craziness potential is just like off the charts in the top 10 at least.
Yeah, for sure. The image in my head is like that flow chart, like from school, various topics that had that, where it starts with one option, right? Caleb Williams, probably going to go number 1. But after that, you got Drake May or Jaden Daniels at number 2, right? And then whether May or Daniels is available at 3, I think that dictates how willing the Vikings are to trade up to 3 with 11-23 in their first rounder next year, right? Or what if the Patriots are standing pat? What if they're willing to trade back? And then at number 4 with the Cardinals, right? What happens with the QBs there? Who is willing to go up to that spot? You got the Vikings looming if they don't get the chance, the Giants potentially, the Broncos, the Raiders, if they want to make a drastic move up for Jaden Daniels. There's so many different permutations, and the farther you go down the board, the amount of outcomes increases exponentially. So I think that's the really fun part about this class. There have been classes where we've known, pretty well, who's going to go 1, who's going to go 2. We thought pretty much it was Bryce Young to number 1 to the Panthers last year, and then CJ Stroud probably going number 2, right? But this year there's so much more uncertainty with those 2, 3, 4 options, and especially with the trade partners, right? Because the Vikings really want to get in that conversation. The Raiders have that tie into Jaden Daniels. The Giants are desperate, right? And then the team like the Broncos as well. So I think there's so many different outcomes, and it's a precipitant. It's a product of all the variables at play from 3 all the way down to 11, 12, 13. And that's what makes it fun. But it's very tough to track, and very tough to track all the outcomes at play.
And it's a good point about last year too, because we did know Bryce Young was going to go number 1, and we thought CJ Stroud would go number 2, but I think a lot of people thought Will Levis was going to go to the Colts at 4, like up
Yeah,
until the draft started.
I
So
think he was the odds-on favorite, like the
Yeah.
day before the draft to go number 2 overall. So that's a lesson as well. You know, you never truly know. And I remember, you know, when I was first getting into the draft, I think it was back in the Baker Mayfield draft, and I was like in college at that point. So I don't remember. I wasn't quite as much into the evaluation standpoint back then, but there were reports like the day before the draft that maybe Sam Darnold was going to go number 1 to the Browns, and then it ended up being Baker Mayfield. So you never truly know. Right. These teams know the best, but even now, you know, some of them are still doing cross-checking, final checks, and talking with the owners. And, you know, even then there are wrinkles and in the heat of the moment. So that's the draft, man. It's the most unpredictable event. And that's what makes it so fun. I've said that like 5 times, but you can just tell how passionate we are about it. It's a fun time for sure. This is what we live for. But yeah, in the top 10, that's where it all starts. And that's the fun thing.
Okay, let's get into this top 10 a little bit. We know what's going to happen at number 1 with the Bears and Caleb Williams. At number 2, it seems like Jaden Daniels is the pick. Whether or not Jaden Daniels wants to be a Commander, I think is still up for debate. Whether he wants to go to the Raiders or the Vikings, I don't think it's going to matter what he wants to do. If the Commanders like him, he'll be the pick. Ian, you've got Drake May as the number 1 quarterback in this class, above Caleb Williams and above Jaden Daniels. You've got him as the number 1 player in this class overall. Safe to say you would take Drake May at number 2. Can you see why the Commanders want to go with Jaden Daniels at number 2 instead of Drake May?
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, if it ends up being Jaden Daniels who goes number 2, I'm not going to fail to pick, right? You know, I would take Drake May over Jaden Daniels. And, you know, I can walk you through my process of why. But first off, let's acknowledge why Daniels is a good fit for Washington, right? And Cliff Kingsbury has been on the record saying he's going to, you know, change his offense up a little bit. You know, the spread looks that we saw in Arizona, you know, won't be exactly what he shows in Washington. But generally, you know, his background, right? Texas Tech, the playing at USC, right? Arizona, generally more spread derived looks where you're getting more 3, 4, even 5 wide receiver sets, spreading out the defense. And I think that works twofold in favor of Jaden Daniels, right? The way that he improved as a passer in 2023, the deep passing ability, the deep touch on those slot fades and those 9 routes. You know, I think that was one of his best traits. And you saw that with Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors, their ability to work vertical. I think that plays right into Daniels' wheelhouse. He doesn't have elite velocity with his arm, but he's got the accuracy, man. He's got the trajectory. He's got the sense of timing as well, and the IQ to, you know, recognize those mismatches deep early. So I love that part of his game. I think the spread formation plays into that perfectly. And then at the same time too, you know, if you're working with those spread looks, you were spreading the defense thin, you're lightening the box, and you're allowing Jaden Daniels to also work as a runner with his athleticism, right? And there are times where you want him to preserve himself a little bit more because he's 6'4", 200 around that, right? So there are times when on tape he'll jump into a crowd of 3 defenders and you're like, all right, Jaden, reel back a bit, reel back. You know, we need you to stay healthy, like dial it back a little bit. Love the competitive toughness, but want him to preserve himself. But those spread looks really play into, you know, allowing him to maximize his skill set as a runner too. So I think we'll see a few more wrinkles. I think we'll see some evolution with that offensive scheme, but I also think you're still going to see that kind of personnel grouping. And I think it plays well with Jaden Daniels if that's what you want. But Drake May is the higher graded QB prospect for me. And May and Williams are 2 of the highest graded QB prospects that I've ever evaluated in my time. And to be fair, that's only a 3 to 4 year window with the grading scale that I currently have. So still working on increasing that sample size. But Drake May, to me, and this is just my opinion, right? You know, I could be wrong, and if I am, I'll reevaluate. It's always a cross-checking process for QBs, especially the process for evaluating them goes so far in depth. But Drake May, to me, for a young QB, does a lot of the hard QBing things very well. And he does some of the easy things. He makes it a little harder for himself, right? I think the footwork is the biggest thing. His base width can be pretty inconsistent. There are times where he's a little too narrow, and that can tug his shoulders off their proper alignment, whether it's low or high, that can cause those misses that you see sometimes. And for Drake May being a young quarterback, those issues can snowball sometimes and create cold streaks too. So, you know, once he snaps out of that, he can be one of the best passers that you've ever seen, right? I mean, in structure, right? Fading, drifting away from pressure, you know, giving himself time and space inside the pocket, navigating, but then also, you know, staying in phase while he's sliding away, you know, keeping his shoulders level, being able to process the field while navigating the pocket, showing that multitasking ability, right? It's a lot to juggle. And Drake May has shown that he can do that. And then when he goes off script, the dude is an insane athlete for being 6'4", 228. He's got great mobility off script, even rolling to his left. He can torque his hips. He's got great angle freedom and arm elasticity as well. And then that arm, man, has elite velocity too. He can drive the ball into tight windows. He can layer pace and touch at a very high level. I think everything that you need is there from a physical and a mental standpoint, and the things that he needs to fix, right? The footwork, there are lapses in decision making that come in the heat of the moment that you would like him to cut down on, but that's another young QB thing, right? Just 21 years old. The supporting cast weakened a little bit in 2023, and there were rumors that he was playing with injuries too. So I think get him healthy, get him in a better supporting structure. And I really think you have all the tools to be, a type of quarterback like the Jordan Love that we saw in 2023 for the Packers, a player who has that elite physical talent to elevate the offense, but can do it within structure, right? That's the most important thing, but then he can create when you need him to as well. So Drake May, for me, is one of those guys that I will stand on the table for, right? I think there are things to clean up, but I think there's more than enough to invest in. And you get him to his peak, you were looking at a top 5 QB in the NFL.
And I think what you talk about his kind of off script ability, that gives me confidence that he could go to a place like New England, where, let's admit, the offensive infrastructure is not great. The receiving core is not great. There are holes along the offensive line. It gives me confidence that he could go there and make the best of a poor situation, even as a rookie, I think, and use some of that off script ability, some of that outside of structure stuff, some of that mobility to kind of overcome the issues that the New England offensive environment might have, which gives me confidence that the Patriots should consider him at 3 and not trade back. I know there are reports that they could think about trading back and then maybe trading back up for JJ McCarthy. I mean, that seems so too cute to me. No, I mean, that just seems like something, if you're going for you want a franchise altering quarterback and you have the number 3 pick, I don't think you take any risks by trading out and try to get back up for another guy. You just take the guy. So that's the way I would go at 3. And it sounds like it's the way you would go as well.
Yeah,
number
sure.
4.
Real quick, you have a chance to get that QB without having to trade up for him, right?
Yes.
To me, that's not even a question, right? Because 2025's QB class, you hate to say the grass isn't greener, right? We don't know what's going to happen because there's so much that can change in a given year. Yeah. But when you have a prospect like this gift wrapped to you, right? And it's like the Bears at number 1 with Caleb Williams. They weren't scheduled to have the number 1 pick. That was going to be the Panthers pick, but they got it in that trade that they got for Bryce Young. And now they have the number 1 pick gift wrapped to get Caleb Williams. It's a similar conversation with Drake May, in my opinion. Yeah. He does have things to clean up, but I think this type of talent only comes around so often. If you're the Patriots, you do have some holes to fill, but I think you have enough capital where you can at least make a dent in that and then get that young QB. And they also have Jacoby Brissett, like you said, who's a very good bridge quarterback. So they don't have to play him right away, right? So I think there are enough absorbing factors there where I'd be willing to take it and comfortable taking that guy, even though he has some things to clean up.
We go to number 4, where the Arizona Cardinals are scheduled to pick. And this is where the draft truly opens up. I think they could go in any number of routes here. The thing for me with the Cardinals is they already have so many picks, right? They've got 7 picks in the top 104. They moved down last year and they moved back up. People are talking that the Cardinals could do something like that again, right? Move down from number 4, get a package for a team who wants to come up for a quarterback, and then try and move back up for Harrison, try and move back up for Neighbors. Again, it feels maybe a little too cute for me, for my liking. I think if I'm the Cardinals, maybe I just stick and pick my favorite receiver. I can see the argument for going back, but at a certain point, you've got to get players, and the Cardinals don't have a lot of them, especially at an elite level, like a Marvin Harrison, like a Neighbors, like an Odunze. So I don't know, if you were in the Cardinals, would you entertain those offers to move back, or would you kind of stick and pick and say we can add an elite option right now who can be a good weapon for Kyler Murray?
Man, it's a 50-50 thing for me. And those of you who've watched me enough, I sit on the fence way too much. It's kind of a draft analyst thing. It happens way too often. Yeah. I got to actually make a decisive decision at some point. But even when I talk about May and Williams, it's like 1A, 1B. It's like, Ian, make a decision, man. Come on, have conviction. I can't do that. But I think Marvin, it's tough. It's 50-50 because Marvin Harrison Jr. is the highest graded receiver that I've ever evaluated, right? Over Jamar Chase. Even I think the complete 3-level framework that he provides at 6'3", 209, 208 is really impressive. I think the route running ability, the flexibility, the ability to attack the football, right? And the explosion and the speed is a rack threat too. I think he really showed more of that this year than he had in years past. And that kind of completed his profile for me. I see a bona fide wide receiver 1. The problem is this class is very strong, Dallas, and we have seen rumors that some teams, don't know if it's the Cardinals. It could be the Cardinals. Maybe it's not the Cardinals, but some teams have Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze a lot closer to MHJ than people let on. And some teams even have Neighbors as wide receiver 1. Again, are the Cardinals that type of team? I don't know. But even if the Cardinals have them closer together, like clustered together at the top, right? Maybe they're willing to trade back, play the board a little bit, and get one of those guys. Maybe it doesn't matter to them quite as much who it is because they're all so strong prospects. That's the wrench in the equation for me. That's the wild card. Because if you're looking at my board, I would be more than happy to take MHJ there and just roll with it, right? But it's all about playing the board, getting proper value. And the Cardinals have a lot of capital in this class, but why not get more, right? It's more picks in the top 100. It's more opportunities to strengthen your roster and get those gems that can really accelerate your rebuild, right? So, I never say no to more picks, and especially when you have this kind of wide receiver trio at the very top, I think there's the flexibility to do that. And in my last mock draft this past weekend, I did trade back. I think it was the Patriots taking Drake May in number 3. And then you got the Minnesota Vikings moving up to 4 to get JJ McCarthy. I think he's a little inflated in the media. He's a fringe top 25 guy for me, but he's a young QB. He's talented. I can see why there's consideration for him in the top 15. But at the same time, this is misinformation season. So maybe all of that is smoke, trying to get teams to pay a little bit more, right? So you can never be completely sure. Right. But I think the Vikings are one team that could be incentivized to make that kind of move because they have the supporting structure. They have the weapons, the offensive line, the coaching. They can incubate him and get him to his ceiling. And then the Cardinals move back to 11 and 23, and they can use that capital to move back up for a guy like Malik Neighbors if they get to a certain point. So I think the Cardinals have the most important thing, which is flexibility. What do? I don't know. I think you have to compel them off that spot if you're the Vikings. But if the Vikings called me and they really wanted McCarthy and they said, hey, we'll give you 11, 23 in next year's first, maybe some change beyond that, I'd be compelled to take that because I love MSJ, but Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze, they're both right there.
I mean, I think everyone probably saw the behind the scenes footage of Cardinals GM Monty Ossenfort from last year's draft where he's wheeling and dealing. I mean, this is a man who knows what he's doing when he's moving up and down the board. So I wouldn't be surprised either. And trust me, I'm all for trading back most times in getting more capital. I think it makes a lot of sense. I just think that Cardinals are in kind of a unique position here, sitting here. They've already got a franchise quarterback, or at least a quarterback they're committed to in Kyler Murray. You can take one of the best receivers, I think, in multiple drafts and add him to a depth chart that desperately needs a wide receiver, right? They lost Marquise Brown this offseason. Michael Wilson is probably their top receiver if the season starts today. It's not like they don't need a wide receiver, Ian. My other thing would be, how far are they willing to move back? Because if you move out of the top 10, unless you already have that second trade lined up, you're probably not getting a Dunze or Neighbors, right? I think those guys are probably going top 9 at absolute worst, unless you have that second trade lined up or feel very confident you can move up like you did last year. I think it's hard to do. My other thing would be the Cardinals also have 23. If they want to add more picks, you could always trade back from 23, move back in later let a team who wants to move up for a quarterback come back into the round 1. Sorry, 27. It's 20. I think the Cardinals have 23 because I've projected the Vikings trading 11 and 23 to them about 100 times. So it's getting confusing at this point. But they have 27. But I do think that could be a spot where a team would come up and get a first round quarterback. So I think even if you want to move back and get other picks, there are other avenues to do that besides moving out of the Marvin Harrison range. But you're right. If you do feel like these 3 receivers are all kind of in the same range, what's stopping you from taking a slight step back? Which is interesting, I think, if you think about where the Giants are. The Giants are at 6. If they want JJ McCarthy, they've got the shortest path just to move up 2 spots. And I think that would be the most enticing to the Cardinals as well, because at worst, you're getting one of those 3 wide receivers. There's no chance that you're not getting a shot at one of those 3 wide receivers. That's kind of the interesting play to me. If the Vikings aren't able to get up to 4 or 5, how much do the Giants want to get up, and what are they willing to give up to get into the McCarthy sweepstakes?
Yeah, and that's the tough part too, because the Giants gave up some capital trading for Brian Burns too. So they don't have an overwhelming haul of capital. You've got a potential reset, with Daniel Jones on the horizon. And we were talking about that beforehand, right? Like getting out of Daniel Jones limbo, what will it take? And is JJ McCarthy the guy to do that, right? There have been reports from guys who are, well keyed in that are saying JJ isn't the Giants guy. So that's a tricky part. I think, if you really did want him and you want to insert him into that offense, right, you could make that move up. But for me, I think the biggest variable for the Cardinals again is, are they willing to play ball? Are they willing to take one of those 2 or 3 wide receivers, right? That's the biggest variable. How do they feel about MHJ, and how do they feel about Neighbors and Odunze, right? Is the gap small enough where we're willing to play the board a little bit, kind of play with fire and take that risk, but we can move up a little bit too. So I think, to your point, I absolutely agree. If they do trade all the way back to 11, that's kind of on the edge right there. And you want to have a trade in place because the board moves fast, and you've got teams like, the Bears, who, if one of those is there at number 9, I think adding Neighbors or Dunze to, that wide receiver core with Keenan Allen and DJ Moore is a very appealing play, with Caleb Williams too. So I think for the Giants, it really depends. Are they willing to make that move up for JJ McCarthy, or are they willing to sit because they're not in love with him, right? You got to be in love for a QB if you're moving up for him. You got to be head over heels, ready to go. I look at the Vikings and Drake May, right? Like that's a perfect cohesion, a perfect marriage of situation and potential, right? Like we know we can probably get him to his peak. With the Giants, with JJ McCarthy, one, I don't know if he's the style of QB that they would want. I think you're wanting a guy who's a little bit more the Josh Allen mold that Brian Dable fell in love with in Buffalo, right? The guy that he was able to mold, a little bit more of a threat off platform. And I'm not saying JJ isn't, but JJ, is a little bit leaner, a little bit lighter. He's got enough athleticism for sure, but I think the key appeal with him is going to be his upside within the pocket, right? So, you look at that, and I don't know if he fits the mold for them. And so those are the layers of discussion for the Giants. But for me, you mentioned it, like the path is not long. Like 6 to 4 is a lot shorter than 11 to 4. But that's the tricky part too for the Vikings. Like, so the Vikings are going to have to entice the Cardinals more, so the Cardinals get more capital, right? Maybe they can win a treasure trove here. So many different variables, man. And you mentioned too, like we know that the Vikings are going to trade up essentially. We know they're going to package that. So every mock draft you do, it's a matter of who has 11 and 23. Is it the Cardinals? Is it the Patriots? Like who is it? We know it's going to be someone else. We just don't know who. But the Giants are the interesting wild card. I think they stand pat at number 6, or maybe even trade back a little bit, just because they don't have a ton of capital. And right now, the QB situation to me, if they can't get Drake May, which I think the Patriots are in the driver's seat, they can stay put and pick May at number 3. If Drake May goes number 3, I think the Vikings and the Giants get a little less tantalized about the QB situation. I think the Vikings are more prudent to get McCarthy because they're a little bit more ready to incubate his growth. But that's the tough part, man. That's the tough part. Drake May is the apple of the eye, and there's one team who can just take all of those outcomes and throw them out the door by picking him, and that's New England.
And it really comes down to which quarterbacks these teams like. And that's just something that we don't know. And we're not going to know until they're chosen, right? So it's hard to say who's motivated to give up what sort of packages when we don't know which quarterbacks these guys like. And you saw like Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, the Vikings GM, a couple of days ago, was asked like, how many of these quarterbacks do you like? Do you put them in the same tier? And I think he told the reporter, like, I'm not telling you that because that's going to affect my negotiating power, right?
Exactly.
That's the whole shell game here, is how much are you willing to give up to get in the position you need to get the guy you want without revealing who that is and what your plan might be, right? So it's all very complicated. I think on the Giants, the thing is, like, you've got to find a way, I think, to get out of this Daniel Jones contract at some point. You don't know if you're going to be at this point again to be able to get an option to replace Daniel Jones. Joe Shane, the GM, and Brian Dable, the head coach, I wouldn't say have the safest of job security after last season, especially given some of the interpersonal stuff with locker room stuff and coaches, disputes. I wouldn't say it's the best situation. I would not have a problem if they decide to go for a quarterback, but you're right. I think if you sit in that position, I think I like to see them sit there and stake and pick and add another weapon like a Neighbors or a Dunze.
And here's the thing too, real quick, because you made a great point with the job security, right? Like I don't know if there's a saving grace QB at 6 overall, right? Especially if Drake May is off the board. Even Drake May, like I'm well documented being extremely high on him, but even I don't know in that situation with New York, I don't know if he's the guy to save your job in 1 year, right? Maybe 2 years, but I don't think Brian Dable and Joe Shane have that kind of security. You mentioned it, right? So I think it's tough because at least, if you survive this year, right? If you designate Daniel Jones as a post June 1st cut in 2025, you have 30 million of cap savings, upwards of 30 million, just 11 million dead cap. I think that's the outcome that they take if they can see through that year, right? But you're not getting your saving grace QB in the draft at 6 overall. You're getting JJ McCarthy, who I think can be solid in the right supporting structure, right? But
Yeah.
do the Giants have that right now? Definitely not with the weapons. And I think they could add some competition at right tackle too. And the interior is still kind of suspect as well. John Michael Schmitz was only a rookie,
Yeah.
but he was up and down. The guard spot can still improve a little bit. I think they signed John Runyon from Green Bay, but there's still some uncertainty there. So not the kind of situation that I would expect to accelerate his growth to a degree like a CJ Stroud, where, hey, year one, he's ready to go, right? And JJ McCarthy isn't even near that close to as Stroud as a prospect for me as well. So a lot of different layers into it, but the Giants are in a tough situation. That's kind of, any way you piece it together, that's kind of where you land. You don't really want to be in this kind of spot.
I agree with you that JJ McCarthy is not a saving grace. I do wonder, like, optically, would it buy Daboll and Shane a little bit of time? Like, hey, we've got this round one quarterback, we're going to develop into 2025. We've got the plan. Can we stick around one more year and see this plan through? I don't know. Who knows?
The thing with if I was the owner, I'd be looking at him. I'm like, well, okay, you just gave Daniel Jones 4 years, 180 million, so
80 million guaranteed, and now you want to use
your plan. So what?
Exactly.
Like that would be. I'd be a little skeptical, right? Like it's tough though. It's really tough because sometimes it does happen. Sometimes deals don't age well, but it's tough. It's very tough to divert course so suddenly, and it feels a little abrupt. It feels a little forced if you pick JJ that early for that kind of team, right? From Minnesota, I can understand it because they're ready. Yeah. New York is not ready for that kind of QB. I don't think they are.
All right, the team we kind of skipped over here at number 5 is the Chargers. Now, I think that they've got a very interesting choice too. They could stick and pick and get an offensive lineman. Jim Harbaugh cannot stop talking about how much he wants an offensive lineman. He must have an offensive lineman. I think they could also go for a wide receiver. They could trade back. To me, I mean, this is a team that I think is entering a little bit of a reset year, right? You part ways with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I could see the argument for moving back a little bit if another team wants to come up for a quarterback, for one of these wide receivers. They're a team, I think, that it would make sense to get that extra draft capital over the next couple of seasons, kind of reset your roster. I don't think adding, Malik Neighbors to this roster or Joe Alt to this roster is going to make the Chargers a playoff team in 2024. I just really don't. And as much as Jim Harbaugh has success in year one everywhere he goes, Stanford, San Diego, 49ers, everywhere he's been, he pretty much has immediate success. I just don't see that being the case with the Chargers. So to me, the wise move is moving back, but Jim Harbaugh doesn't always want to wait. So I know we keep saying these could go either way, but that's what makes it so fun, right? It's like every one of these teams has kind of that 51-49 choice where either side makes sense.
Yeah, and it's all about the flow chart of outcomes, right? Number one, we know it'll probably be Caleb. Number two, it'll be May or Daniels. Number three, it'll be May or Daniels, or maybe even McCarthy if they sneak in. But probably, the gut feeling is that the Patriots stand pat and take a QB, right? Yeah. Then number four, if 3 QBs are off the board, do the Cardinals stay or do they trade back with another QB? I don't think 4 quarterbacks have gone 1, 2, 3, 4 ever in NFL draft history. So, it would be breaking the mold. And is McCarthy the kind of QB to do that? I don't think so as a prospect, but at the same time, every year the QB tax has never been higher, right? Teams are always desperate to get that kind of guy. And the one thing about this QB class, Dallas, I think, some years you have some issues with character, right? Not issues, but some uncertainty. All the character reviews that we've heard from all 4 of these guys are glowing. I mean, different, but all very positive, right? Caleb Williams, the competitive mentality that he has is unhinged and it's going to help him succeed, right? Jaden Daniels, the work ethic, is impeccable. And that's what helped him kind of reinvent his game. Drake May, a very down to earth, very humble guy who definitely understands the X's and O's side of it. And then JJ McCarthy, who there was a quote from Dane Brugler's the beast. Dane Brugler, very good draft analyst, who, there was a NFL coach basically on record saying like, hey, when recruits were coming, he's like, hey, listen, if you're coming to Michigan to party, don't come because we're trying to win a championship. And then they backed it up. They won a championship. So character is not the issue with any of these guys, I don't think, on the surface anyway. I think, all of these guys have the intangibles and they have talent as well. But it's just, there's an extra layer that goes into that evaluation thing. So I think, for the Cardinals, if they pick Marvin Harrison, if they stayed because no one is willing to trade point, then that opens the door for the Chargers to take calls, right? And that's where it starts. And Jim Harbaugh, he coached JJ in college, right? He's incentivized to get him in a good landing spot. So I see the Vikings in that situation, right? Like if the Vikings are willing to trade up to 5 at that point, maybe Harbaugh is willing to give them a bit of a discount just to get his guy JJ in the right spot. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the NFL is a business, right? So I don't think that's going to happen. We're just kind of playing the possibilities. But the Chargers, The Chargers, it's not really in their hands, because they have to see what happens at 3 and 4. But if JJ is still there at 5, I think that's the biggest trade chip that you can get. And if he's not there, then all of the trade chips are wide receivers or offensive tackles, players that the Chargers would consider for themselves anyway. So that's kind of the balance. That's kind of the tug of war that they're playing at 5th overall.
And they're a team that if they move back to 11, they'll still have a lot of options. I think they'd be interested in whether that's an offensive tackle, whether that's Brock Bowers if he's still available. I think they're at a position roster wise where they could consider almost anything, not quarterback obviously, but almost any other position I think they could consider. So moving back to 11 or maybe even farther, like maybe to 12, maybe to 13 if the Raiders or Broncos want to come up, don't think that would be as much of a problem for the Chargers as it might be for the Cardinals. So I think the Chargers is going to be a true turning point. I mean, if you had to say it today, Ian, how do you think this top 5 is going to go? Like if you're, I know you did your mock draft. Are you still on that same wavelength of how this top 5 will go? Like if you had to give me a top 5 players and teams, like what's your best guess right now?
I would say Caleb to the Bears for sure. My gut says let's spend a little more time on Jane Daniels to the Commanders real quick. How much stock do you put into that? We've been hearing that the Top Golf visit didn't go very well. This is the kind of noise that we get into with the draft cycle, man. A lot of it is just noise, but we got to address it at least, right? Like how much stock do you put into that? Because on the surface, I don't like to put too much into it, right? I think he's a good scheme fit for them as well, but Drake May as well. Like, how do you parse through that?
It's tough. I mean, Jaden Daniels' agent is on Twitter, giving the old wink emoji or thinking emoji or whatever it is, and kind of indicating that he wasn't too happy about the whole Top Golf experience. Like, I don't know. It's definitely silly season, and Top Golf seems like the silliest story of them all, right? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I get the idea of getting all these guys in one room and seeing who kind of steps up and how they treat each other and how they treat other players or treat other people in general, but I think if I were drafting a quarterback, I'd want to get as much one-on-one time as I could. So that's why I kind of think the Top Golf thing's a little bit quirky, a little bit different, even though I know the Commanders are not the only team who's done something like that. We've seen other teams do that with prospect groups in the past. But I totally buy that Jaden Daniels might not want to go to Washington. Like I buy that. He knows Antonio Pierce. It sounds like he has an existing relationship with somebody. I think he would probably want to go to Las Vegas. I understand why he'd want to go to Minnesota, right? If you rank all the situations where a rookie quarterback could end up, I think Minnesota is by far number one. You get to play with Justin Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, with TJ Hawkinson, with Kevin O'Connell calling plays, a good offensive line. Like I can see why you'd prefer to go there, but if the Commanders like him at number 2, I'm not really sure like what the other options are. He's just going to have to go there or else just not play. And like I said, unless he's Eli Manning 2.0, I don't think we're going to go down that road again.
Yeah, for sure. And to add to that as well, like the character evaluation is one thing. Like they can be a good dude and have good character, and a lot of guys who enter the NFL do. I'd say 60 to 70 to 80% even, right? But that's only the first step, especially if you're a QB, the face of the franchise, the leader. You got to have the right kind of character that they want. You got to have the right kind of leadership style. And not every team is going to want the same kind of leadership style. There are different ones. Caleb Williams is that ultra competitive guy who your teammates can rally around, right? Jaden Daniels is documented being more of that lead by example, a little bit quieter, but he gets the job done, right? So it's just, what kind of leadership style do you want? And I think those visits do play into parsing through that and kind of piecing together and kind of figuring it, getting to the root level of that as well. So another factor that goes into it, but we hear the noise about character evaluations, right? Yeah. And yes, having good character is the first step, but it's also about the type of personality that you want in your locker room, in your culture. And that's been a fact-finding thing for Washington with Adam Peters and Dan Quinn, because they've got a new culture there. It's time to establish that and find that. And a lot of times it takes time to find that, right? So it's trepidatious, it's uncharted territory, but another element of many that goes into this kind of process.
And you said it, with a new ownership group there led by Josh Harris. I mean, they're starting over fresh. They've got all new processes in place. And, I think they're trying to kind of find their path as they do this. And I'm sure there will be some missteps and maybe some stuff that comes up like this again that will think people are, we're going back to the old Washington franchise, the way we did things. I don't think it's that at all. I think that if I were a Washington fan, I'd be pretty happy with how this process has played out, and whether the end result is maybe as good as we might hope, we'll see. But I wouldn't be too concerned about how this pre-draft process has played out if I were a Washington fan.
Yeah, I think it's been generally solid, and they have a lot of capital, so they have the momentum to gain. Yeah. Real quick, let's circle back to the Chargers, because I don't think we didn't tie the bow there. Let's say
Yep.
they do stick at 5. Who would you
Mm.
go with? I think my top options would probably be, assuming if Marvin Harrison Jr. is still there, that would be really tough
Yeah.
to pass up for me.
Yeah.
But Joe Alt is also a very compelling option because he's a blue chip prospect, my 4th overall player, and I think he could
Mhm.
file into right tackle if you want. So what are you feeling there? Is Marvin Harrison Jr., Joe Alt the top options, and then maybe Roma Dunze if there's
Mhm.
another wrinkle in there?
Yeah, I think all those guys, and I think Malik Neighbors as well. I think it would have to be in consideration. I mean, I get the argument for saying, "Hey, offensive line is not a need area, right?" I mean, the Chargers can play with their front 5 they have right now. They could easily play. Trey Pipkins is a league average, maybe below right tackle,
Yeah.
but needs are not just what their need is in 2024. You've got to look years down the line. Like Trey Pipkins has 2 years left on his deal. He's not going to be there forever. I think you've got an option or the chance to land someone like Joe Alt. I could see taking it. And then whether that means Trey Pipkins is a trade candidate during the draft, like maybe I could see something like that. But I wouldn't have any problem with them taking Harrison, Alt, Neighbors, Odunze. I think one of those 4 would have to be the way I would go at number 5.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what I'm feeling too. You could trade back again, but again, trading back for the Chargers is not as simple as trading back for the Patriots or the Cardinals. The Patriots and Cardinals, they have the prime real estate. So if they want to play ball, they can do it, right? The Chargers kind of need to wait and see what happens there. If no one trades, if the Patriots and Cardinals both stand pat, then the Chargers are in the green zone. Then they can look at what's available and maybe make a move and maybe kind of play the board and get an offensive tackle in round 1, like Joel if he slips, but maybe Taliese Fuaga from Oregon State, maybe JC Latham, Amarius Mims, Troy Fatanu if you want, Oldu Fashanu, move him to the right side if you want. And then you can dip into this really strong receiver class on day 2 with the extra capital that you have, because the Chargers, they still have a lot of needs across the board. Wide receiver is one, center with Corey Linsley. I think they brought him back on a reduced salary, so he should be back in 2023. But but beyond that, we don't know. Defensive tackle is one. I think edge depth and young talent at edge. They got Tuli Pilotu. I think I said that right.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one
for sure. But they got Tuli. They got Tuli behind those 2 veterans. Linebacker is a need as well. Corner is a need. Long-term security at safety as well. So basically nothing.
Just about everything. Almost everything.
Everything except quarterback is off limits. Is not off limits for the Chargers. So I think getting capital is the right way to go. It's not really. They're not in the driver's seat. They got to wait and see what happens in 3-4.
In my final mock, which is going to come out tomorrow, I've got the Chargers moving back to 11 and 23, and then they trade down one more time. So I think they ended up picking at 15 and 23 and taking Byron Murphy and Graham Barton. It's like adding the trenches in both spots. And then I think in round 2, I've got them taking Ladd McConkey. It's like there are enough picks here, I think, especially if they trade back and get more picks in round 2, where they can truly address like a lot of those needs that you mentioned and maybe not have to go into the season with this roster it's one part aging and then one part like no depth. It's not a great combination for an NFL roster. So I think getting more picks and hitting top to bottom and adding to that depth is the way I would go. But it's hard passing up one of those blue chip talents, man. I mean, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is sitting right there and you can add him to Justin Herbert's wide receiver core, which can we talk about the Chargers wide receiver core? I mean, Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, and that's as far as I can go off the top of my head. I'm not sure who. I think they have 4 total receivers right now on their roster. I can't remember who the other 2 are, but adding Marvin Harrison Jr. into that depth chart, it's so enticing that even if you get a Godfather offer, it'd be hard to turn down, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what Marvin Harrison Jr. allows you to do, right? Because I was pretty high on Quentin Johnston's potential, right? There was definitely projection there, but I think if you can isolate him as more of a rack threat, right? A lot, kind of like what the Chiefs did with Rashee Rice. I think a lot of drag routes, a lot of mesh routes, design touches, right? I think if you get a player like Marvin Harrison Jr. who can be that 3-level threat on the boundary, that independent separator who can work at the catch point as well, that might allow Quentin Johnston to play where he's most comfortable right now, which is using that long strider speed, that agility and twitch in the short ranges. And I think that allows him to maybe recalibrate in year 2. So it's a great fit. I think it's a great option. It's just, is he going to be there? The Cardinals are in the driver's seat. They can take him if they want. They've got that first opportunity. But if he's still there, man, I think getting him with Justin Herbert, I think that's not only a great QB wide receiver duo, but it also allows Quentin Johnston to play more to his strengths and potentially revitalize his career. So it's a twofold positive outcome for the Chargers if they can get it.
Hope for Quentin Johnston. I didn't know that still existed out there. I'm proud of you, Ian. You've still got the optimistic outlook. I like that. Okay.
I never like to bury guys until after 2 years. I think you got to wait a little bit for sure.
All right. We talked about the Giants. Anything else on the Giants before we go to number 7 here? I think we kind of covered what their options are at number 6. At number 7, the Titans. I mean, I feel like Joe Alt has been penciled in to number 7 for about 3 months now. It seems like the obvious fit. I mean, the Titans addressed everything else in free agency, but offensive tackle. But we just talked about it. Joe Alt might not be there. So does that mean if he's not there, if Joe Alt goes to the Chargers at 5, if Joe Alt goes to 6, either to the Giants or to somebody that trades up, do you think the Titans would just take the next offensive tackle on the board, whether that's Olu Fashanu, whether that's Talise Fuaga, or anybody that they think could step in an offensive tackle? Or do you think they go off the board and go somewhere else? There's a couple other positions they can maybe target here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Titans? It feels like Alt is so obvious that it makes me think it's almost too obvious going into round 1.
Yeah, and I can't speak to every team's board. Some teams might have the tackles a little bit closer together, but for me personally, Joe Alt is my OT1, and it's not very close. He's my top 5 player. I think being 6'9", 321 like he is, being able to acquire leverage like he does is just absurd. You don't see guys who play with that kind of pad level at that height. Usually you hit a point of diminishing returns where it's very tough to manage. But that's not the case with Joe Alt. He's one of the better, more flexible guys when it comes to leverage acquisition. His recovery athleticism is phenomenal. He really improved his hand technique and his independent hand usage and counter ability in 2023. And then he's got really good displacement ability in the run game as well. So I think a complete tackle who's very much worth that OT1 mantle. If he's off the board, I think the Titans could be a sleeper team for one of Malik Neighbors or Roman Dunze if they want to. Probably Malik Neighbors more so. I think DeAndre Hopkins is that boundary threat who's got chemistry with Will Levis. Calvin Ridley is more of that movement Z. So I think Malik Neighbors would file in really nicely as that rack weapon underneath who can also stress defenses vertically. I think he'd be a great fit there. But I could see them trading back too. And again, it kind of depends on what happens with JJ McCarthy. Is he still on the board at this point? If he is, he could go as early as 4. He could fall into the top 10. So if he's still here, I think that's the trade chip that the Titans can use and potentially move back. They don't have a 3rd rounder in this class. That's the key for them. So offensive tackle is a need. Wide receiver 3 is a need. Defensive tackle is a need now. They lost Tyler Tart, so they could use some more. And Danico Autry as well. So they could add a guy in that mold, Darius Robinson. If they get him early on, that would be a good one for sure. But they have a lot of needs, I think, still. Defensive tackle, offensive tackle. You've got edge, potentially more edge depth. Linebacker is one, and then corner as well. They got L'Jarius Sneed. They got Chidobe Awuzie. You could add one more guy there. So, they have a lot of holes to fill still, and not all the capital that they can to get that. Yeah. So if JJ is there, that's the key. That's the biggest trade chip you got. If he is there, though, I think that's an opportunity for the Titans to recoup that value.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that makes sense. Teams that would want to move up, and I think that could be a spot where we see the Vikings move up, just maybe move up those 4 picks and not have to move up all the way to the top of the board. I think that makes sense. I think going for a wide receiver should not be ruled out because, Treylon Burks was a first-round pick 2 years ago, but he's been injured for most of his career. He hasn't really shown anything. Nobody in Tennessee, the GM or the new head coach, had any hand in drafting Treylon Burks. So he's kind of, lame duck there going into his 3rd year. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be 32 years old this summer and is in a contract year, right? So I again, we talk about these needs as if they're kind of, these long-term needs, but Treylon Burks or DeAndre Hopkins might not be there next year. Treylon Burks, we don't know how he fits in. I think you're looking at an opportunity to draft a long-term wide receiver 1/2. I think the thing that we're leaving unsaid is that Bill Callahan is now the offensive line coach in Tennessee. Yeah. Brian Callahan's son, obviously, maybe a future Hall of Fame offensive line coach when it's all said and done. Maybe the Titans are banking on, hey, we can add some mid-round offensive linemen from what is a pretty deep offensive line class, give them to Bill Callahan, and we'll be good. So let's use our first-round pick on an athlete like Roma Dunze or Malik Neighbors who we're not going to find round 2, round 3, and say, Bill Callahan, time for you to get to work on these mid-round prospects we brought in for you.
Yeah, for sure. And, even going back to the last cycle, DeJuan Jones, right? Jack Conklin got injured early in the year. DeJuan Jones came in as a rookie and ended up playing very well down the stretch because of Bill Callahan. So, and DeJuan Jones, there's a caveat there. Like, he probably would have been a top 50 pick if not for, the Senior Bowl. He played really well that first day and then just kind of dipped out of practices, right? And I think that rubbed some executives the wrong way. So, he fell for reasons related to that. But he came in and he played at a very high level as a rookie under Bill Callahan. So I think, yes, you're looking at that coaching aspect. I think, obviously, You don't want to play offensive tackle roulette with Will Levis. You want to protect your quarterback for sure. You want to invest in that. And Joe Alt with Bill Callahan, man, that upside is just unmatched. Joe Alt can be an all-pro within 2 or 3 years with that kind of coaching. So I'm a big fan of investing in premier positions with premier talent if you can. But at the same time, yes, if you feel good about the coaching that you have in this tackle class, especially, I think you can wait a little bit, right? Kingsley Suamataya at the top end of round 2 could be a good option from BYU. You got a few other guys as well. Kieran Amagaji from Yale has all the talent in the world if he can stay healthy. So, there are guys. It's just, for me being the Titans, you have that quarterback who, this is a big year for Will Levis to take that next step. He showed promise, but he's not quite there yet. So I think investing in him as much as you can is the option that I would take. So if I'm the Titans at number 7 and Joe Alt is still there, that's a tough pick for me to pass up on, because I think that fits what you need right now. And it also allows you to maximize this window that you have, and you can get another wide receiver next year, right? You can keep investing in that position. But when you have an opportunity to protect your quarterback, I'll put it this way. If you have an opportunity to protect your QB and you pass up on that, that might be a risk down the road because he's not protected enough. And if he takes too many sacks, if he's shell-shocked in the pocket, that can really erode his development.
And we know the Titans took Peter Skoronski in the first round last year, and they signed Lloyd Cushenberry, this new free agent center, to start this year. But I'd say 3 out of their 5 offensive line spots could still use a pretty serious upgrade. It's not just left tackle. It's kind of all across the board. So I think the Titans, given that they might have the league's worst offensive line, it's starting with Joe Alt and then adding those mid-round picks on top of that might not be the worst idea. Number 8, the Atlanta Falcons. This is a team I think that also could go in any number of directions. If I'm the Falcons, I think my number 1 choice, Ian, is to trade back, because I don't necessarily need a wide receiver. I definitely don't need one of these offensive tackles. Atlanta has a pretty solid offensive line in place already. I think you're in a spot as the Falcons where you can have your choice of the defensive players on the board, right? I mean, this is going to be such an offensive dominated top 10 that if you're the Falcons and you want a defensive player, you're going to get your choice. But are there going to be offers to move up? Are there going to be offers to move back? Again, it comes down to that kind of flow chart that you talked about. Who's going to be here that's going to entice teams to trade up, that's going to allow the Falcons to move back? Is it going to be a McCarthy? Is a receiver going to still be there? Or are the Falcons just going to say, no, we're good. We'll take Latu. We'll take Dallas Murphy. We'll take Byron Murphy or Dallas Turner. We'll add them to this defense that needs that kind of upfront force, and we'll call it a day. I think there's, again, multiple options that Atlanta could consider.
Yeah, for sure. And, again, it's kind of playing the board and seeing what falls in. But, you could get a receiver, too, if you wanted to. I think with Kirk Cousins, he's got Drake London. They signed Darnell Mooney in free agency. They got Kyle Pitts, who I hope they use Pitts in more of a flex wide receiver tight end role. I hope they use that flexibility to their advantage. But you could use a guy like Malik Neighbors or Roman Dunze if you wanted to as well. So, I think that flexibility is there for Atlanta, but you're absolutely right. You have 3 defenders, I think, and Byron Murphy II isn't quite at that level for me right now. He's more of a top 32 guy for sure. I like him in the first round. I really like him. And I think, you can rationalize taking him there, but not quite as flexible as Johnny Newton for me. And that was something that really showed up on tape. I think Byron Murphy II is a little bit better at absorbing combo blocks and double teams, with that 6'1", 308-pound frame. But the flexibility does show up sometimes when he needs to pry through a gap or finish with ankle flexion. There are times when he can't always quite pinch that angle in pursuit, and that can knock him out of plays. So, I want to see him improve that for sure. But the Atlanta Falcons, they got Grady Jarrett, who I think Byron Murphy II at his peak kind of has some similarities to him from a play style and a usage perspective. So I think it'll be a fun fit for sure, getting him and Jarrett and David Onyemata, and you've got a few other young guys in that rotation as well. You can get that talent. But you could also get Dallas Turner, who I think is exactly the type of edge that they've been waiting for in Atlanta. I think one thing that Atlanta doesn't have is that transcendent edge player, who can win with speed and bend and power, but then also cover the flats as well. Because Raheem Morris coming over from Los Angeles, I think that's one thing that's really important is in his scheme, right? You're not going to play him in that role every down, but, I think especially in the modern NFL, you need guys who can disguise rush looks, or rush from different alignments, or stunt across formations and penetrate gaps, or, cover the flats and, kind of feign rushes and confuse quarterbacks, right? If you have Dallas Turner, who's, at 9 tech and you think he's going to rush you, and then all of a sudden he's dropping at the flat, taking away one of your outlet options, all of a sudden that really constricts you as a quarterback. That kind of limits your options, and that can cause you to wait a little bit longer and, get the sack for someone else. So I think having a talent like Dallas Turner, who can confound offenses with his just raw natural ability is very, very appealing to me. I know Latu is a good option here as well. I think he's the best pass rushing technician in the class. So if they did take him, if they felt good about the medicals and they took him, I wouldn't argue, because I think another thing that the Falcons need is that pass rushing productivity. They haven't had a ton of that in previous years. And Latu to me is a guy with that pass rushing bag that he has, man. Like, he's got gyroscopic hips. He's so good at rotating his hips, channeling torque on his punches and his swipes. And then he's got a phenomenal counter arsenal as well, where he can react instantly and stack moves. I think the bend is very good with him too. So right away, you're looking at a high level pass rusher. But I look at the things that Dallas Turner can do with his hyper elite physical foundation. That's something that the Falcons desperately need. It's the only thing they desperately needed. And I think he gives them that right there. So I would go with Dallas Turner, but I can see the argument for multiple defensive guys on the board.
So you've got Dallas Turner as the number 7 overall player on our PFN big board. And then your next edge rushers are Chop Robinson at 18, Jared Verse at 21, and Latu down at 22. I don't think I'm seeing any mock drafts with Chop Robinson or Verse like isn't even an option for the Falcons, where I think is where you do see Latu up there quite a bit. Talk to me about why you think that there's such a gap between Turner and Latu. Is it just the age for Latu? Is it the medical for him? And I guess my other question is, I think the Falcons are a team that is kind of all in like right now. They signed Kirk Cousins. He's 36. They're kind of going for it right now. Is there one of these guys who you think could be the contributor from day one, like be the most impactful from in their rookie year? If that's where the Falcons, if that's what they think they need, is someone who can contribute from day one.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Latu fits that category for sure. If we're talking about pass rushing right away, his hand usage is some of the best that I've seen in a prospect for sure. But the thing that separates him and Turner for me personally, I look at Latu, 6'5", 260 pounds, right? But sub 33-inch arms. And I think that shows up with his power arsenal. He's not as good at driving power. I think there are times when he tries to displace, get inside guys' frames, and he can stall out a little bit too. He just doesn't quite have the length to channel and sustain power rushes the way that Turner can. When Dallas Turner, when he gets going with a full head of steam and he fully extends inside the torso, he can blast guys back off their center of gravity. That power profile is legit. And it surprises you because he has the 4.46 speed at 6'3", 247, right? He's got the elite bend capacity too. So you think he's a finesse rusher, and then he comes back with a bull rush and a long arm and just devastates a blocker, right? So Dallas Turner has that profile more so than Latu to me. I think Latu is a very good finesse rusher. I think his bend for his size is truly elite. I think his hand usage is elite. But when he needs to win with power, when he needs to cave in the line, and when he needs to work off of power, I don't trust him quite as much to start off rushes with that element as consistently. And then in run defense too, I think he's a high motor defender. I think he's got range for sure. But, there are times when he doesn't hold up setting the edge as well as I would like to. I think he can improve his balance. I think his play strength isn't always elite. So those are the things that limit him for me. The medicals, it's not so much. I think the medicals, I had Latu and Verse pretty much tied at 21, and I think I put Verse over him because of the medicals, right? It's not something that I quantify, but when I have two prospects in a similar bracket, that's when it can become a tiebreaker, and that was the case for that. I think Jared Verse is the better run defender. I think he's the best run defender of these four, and then he's got the speed to power. He's very explosive. He's a good hand fighter too. So I think Verse and Latu give you the highest floor, but I think Turner gives you the highest ceiling. And I think Chop Robinson gives you a pretty high ceiling too. I like Turner's power profile a little more just because he's longer, but Chop Robinson is one of those guys who you can line him at 7 tech, wide 9, or shade him across alignments and let him rush in NASCAR fronts too, just from depth, and just use his explosion, his twitch, and just devastate offensive tackles too. So I think that upside is there for sure. It's kind of a dichotomy between high floor, high ceiling guys, but I naturally gravitate to the high ceiling guys if they're close. I think it's neither Chop nor Turner is a liability on the operational side. So then it comes down to, kind of projecting talent and value. And I think that's where it stands.
I think seeing how these 4 edges, Turner, Robinson, Verse, and Latu, how they come off the board in round 1 specifically is going to be pretty interesting, because I think, the Falcons are obviously the first team who I think is even going to consider a defensive player here in round 1, but how those 4 guys fall, I think is kind of up for debate. I mean, I think everyone's penciling in Turner at number 8, but I don't think it'd be totally surprising if that's Latu or if that's Murphy, and and then the other 3 edges fall in a different order from there. So I where those guys go is something I'm definitely going to be watching.
And here's the thing too, like if Turner doesn't go to the Falcons at 8, where does he go? Because the
I know
Bears,
exactly.
he's not a great schematic fit for Eberflus. He's
Yep.
not. The Saints could maybe take him, but he's not traditionally what Dennis Allen likes in the edge either. The Colts could maybe take him, but the Colts have needs at wide receiver. If Brock Bowers is there, I think he's the guy for them. Corner Quinyon Mitchell as well. So if Dallas Turner doesn't go to the Falcons at number 8, there's a real possibility where he falls to the late teens, and then maybe someone could trade up for him, someone aggressive. So it's another fun wrinkle for this one.
All right, let's move to number 9, where the Chicago Bears are back on the board. Now, if one of the top 3 receivers is here, I think Ryan Poles just like runs the card in. Do you agree on that? I mean, it seems too obvious. I know they need an edge rusher, but if Neighbors or Dunze or even Marvin Harrison, I guess, is somehow there, seems like that would be the pick. I mean, I don't know if you're on the same wavelength there.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same wavelength. I think, because Keenan Allen's only under contract for 1 more year, right? So,
Yes.
You've got that looming in front of you as well. So, I think either one would be a good fit. I think Malik Neighbors is the better fit on day 1 because you can play him in the slot. You can play him as movement Z underneath those 2 guys. But Rome Odunze has a pretty similar profile to Keenan Allen in a few respects. His size adjusted fluidity at 6'3", 212, where he can run routes, he can make sharp direction changes, he can play the ball at the catch point with that body control, with that timing. And then he's got some nifty, shifty rack as well. I think he's a pretty fluid athlete. He's got good speed for his size. So I think Rome Odunze allows you to have a boundary presence, and you can move Keenan Allen into the slot as a big slot if you want to. I think Malik Neighbors gives you your movement Z with that explosive rack ability, and you can play him in space. So it's different molds, but I think both of them provide value. And if I'm the Bears, I don't see a perfect scheme fit at that point. Jared Verse, I think, would be the best scheme fit for Eberflus in round 1. I would try and trade back a little bit to get him, but I have a feeling that someone will take him in the teens too. So it's just a matter of where do you go to get him, right? Playing the board can be trepidatious because if you get too cute, like we said at the very beginning, you can work yourself out of position for a guy. So you got to be careful. I think the best option for the Bears is definitely getting one of those 2 receivers. I think you got Caleb Williams already. Just keep investing in him. Keep investing and making him the guy. And I think that shores you up for the short term, but also gives you some security long term for when Keenan eventually moves on.
Can you imagine it, like being a rookie quarterback like Caleb Williams and coming into a situation with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett, you signed DeAndre Swift, you've got Khalil Herbert, good offensive line, and now you're telling me you're going to drop in Malik Neighbors or Ruma Dunze into this offense. Like, I have to look, but that might be one of the best situations like a number 1 quarterback pick has ever been dropped into. I'd have to think. I mean, it's pretty absurd. And I know it's not, Bears are not a typical number 1 pick, obviously, and that's why it's a little bit different, but it's going to be a great environment for Caleb Williams if it plays out like this.
And it's for the Bears too, it's unique because their wide receiver history is not great across the years. So you might legit, like, not even hyperbole, you might legit end up having 3 of the greatest Bears receivers in history, right? You gotta wait for it to play out, but this is probably one of the better receiving cores that you've seen in franchise history. So and with Caleb Williams throwing them the ball, that's fun to think about for sure. So I love the idea of investing in that. And the Bears only have 4 picks in this class, so unless they trade back from number 9 or they're 75 in round 3, you got to make them count. So I think that's a good opportunity to kind of make that happen.
With such little capital too, it does kind of open up a couple possibilities, I think, on the extremes, right? Like, do you just take all those picks and try and move up and get Marvin Harrison and just create this super connection between him and Caleb Williams? Or do you say, we don't have a lot of picks, we're going to move back for a team that wants a quarterback, for a team that wants something else, and add a couple more day 3 picks or day 2 or 3 picks? I think both could be options. I'd be surprised if the Bears try and move up into the top 5 or 6 and make sure they come away with one of these receivers, but I would not completely rule it out. I think given how they kind of addressed a lot of their holes during the past couple off seasons, how they've set up this roster, if they think that Neighbors or Odunze is going to be that kind of piece they need to put them into the playoffs next season, I would not be surprised if Ryan Poles is aggressive and moves up to make sure he gets one of those 2 guys.
Yeah, for sure. And even Harrison, if he fell to 5, it'd take a lot to move me off that pick if I'm the Chargers, right? But in my mock draft this past weekend, I think that's exactly what I did, because you mentioned the Bears. The roster is pretty close to being set. You got a solid offensive line. I know there's been talk about offensive tackle. I think you definitely need a center, but outside of center, and Nate Davis didn't play as well as you would have hoped him to for a free agent signing. So you're hoping that
they traded for Ryan Bates. They do have options, and Odie, what's your thought on Broderick Jones at left tackle? I mean, he came out of nowhere as a late round day 3 pick, and I think he's played pretty well at left tackle for the Bears, which is why it's kind of confusing to me that they do keep talking about offensive tackle. But you're right, Ryan Poles has said that he's divvied up the Bears scouting staff into 3 groups to debate: should we take an edge, should we take a receiver, or should we take an offensive tackle? It's definitely on their mind. I'm a little confused about why they would use a first round tackle when they've got a guy like Braxton Jones and they could get an elite prospect at a position of bigger immediate need.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. When Braxton Jones was coming out, I really liked the physical talent with him from Southern
Mm.
Utah. You could tell that his physical traits were just dominating, at the FCS level. And at that point, he was kind of relying on that talent to a fault. He wasn't the most refined prospect, but I think he's really taken a few steps up. And talent is not the issue with him. So if he starts to put it together, I don't think you need a new tackle. I think if you play Braxton Jones at swing tackle, I think that's a pick that, yeah, you get Joe Alt or Olu Fashanu, and that's a great player, but you could have also gotten Malik Neighbors or Roman Dunze if they're still there. And I think that's the better bang for your buck at this point. So, I can see the reasoning behind it kind of, but not really, because Braxton Jones to me is a young player who's still ascending and he's got the talent. Talent's not the issue again. So, I think for the Bears, and again, it goes back to if you want to trade up and be aggressive, the roster is almost set. The offensive line is pretty solid aside from center. Get that center, and I think you're good. The offensive cast, aside from wide receiver 3, is very solid. Defensively, you've got Montez Sweat. You've got a decent defensive tackle rotation. Again, they could probably add one more guy, but you've got good stuff there. Linebacker is a strong suit. You've got Jalen Jones. You've got Kyler Gordon. You've got a really nice CB room as well. So that's a good strong suit. And then Tyreek Stevenson, who played well as a rookie, and then Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard at safety. So the roster is pretty strong. I think you're in a position where, and you've extended a few guys too, like Jalen Johnson, like Montez Sweat. So you've got some security with this cast too. So I think for the Bears, if you really want to be aggressive, if MHJ is there, or if you want to trade up for Roma Dunze, use that capital next year, because you have a window where you might not need that quite as much. You can just settle in, get the talent, be aggressive for the final pieces, and just ride that out. I think they have the opportunity to do that if they want to, but it is tricky because you don't have a ton of capital to make that move. So you might have to offer a little bit more to sweeten the pot.
The final team in the top 10, I think, is another interesting choice here, the New York Jets. Now, this is a team I think that's clearly optimizing for the immediate term, right? You've got a 40-year-old quarterback. You've got a head coach and a GM who are definitely on the hot seat, who need to win. I would say probably win a playoff game this year to save their jobs. I don't know what's going to happen if they don't make the playoffs, or if they get in and don't win a game. I think they'll probably all be gone. Having said that, how does that affect how you view this pick at 10? Does that make you lean towards more of Brock Bowers and to get Aaron Rodgers another weapon? Does that make you think we need a contingency plan at offensive tackle, because our offensive line, while it was upgraded over the offseason, it's got some older guys and some injury prone guys, especially at offensive tackle? Do you try and get a contingency plan there, or do you just say, no, we're going to get Aaron another pass catcher because we're going for it all this year?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I think with offensive line in particular, because I think the biggest question for New York is the injury issues, right? Tyron Smith, they signed him as a veteran, but he's had a big injury history at Dallas. And then Morgan Moses is coming off an injury as well. And, before that injury, he was an Iron Man at right tackle. Like, he started, I can't remember how many games, year in and year out. Like, he was
seasons without missing a snap.
Without missing a single snap. So for him, I think it's more of an aberration, but it's one of those things where they're both older than, I think, 31, even 32 even. So, you're getting up there. You want some security. But then this offensive tackle class is a few guys that could be flagged for medicals, right? Troy Fatanu, we've been hearing that the knee could be flagged. Amarius Mims really struggled to stay healthy when he was at Georgia. So there are medical flags that they're considering in this class. At the same time, I look at a guy like Troy Fatanu, right, and what he can provide on that offensive line, because I think day one, if you need him to file in at left tackle, he can be a very solid starter if he needs to. But then at guard as well, he's got guard experience. He projects well there. I know they signed John Simpson from Baltimore, but again, I think for the Jets, injuries have been such a big issue, and also you don't have any long-term assets at that spot. So I think getting a tackle is a viable option for sure. But I look at Brock Bowers, if he's still there. I know they have Tyler Conklin, who caught over 60 passes last year. I didn't realize that until I was looking it up. I don't think that precludes you from taking Bowers, though, because Brock Bowers is just a different kind of weapon. He can work up the seam. He can be a rack threat. He's got bird of prey catch instincts, extending beyond his frame. Just one of those guys who is that dynamic 3-level weapon. And Aaron Rodgers traditionally in his career has really favored having those guys. Jimmy Graham back in the day, right? Guys that can work up the seam, catch those tough passes, but then if you can use them as a rack threat and give easy solutions to Rodgers and the next QB that comes behind him, because if you're the Jets, you got to have that in the back of your mind too. Rodgers is 40 coming off a torn Achilles. Yeah. Like he's probably not going to be a long-term option either. So I think Brock Bowers allows you to bridge that gap, maximize what you have left with Rodgers, but then also get a really solid safety blanket for the next young QB to enter the room. So I think, bridges the gap twofold. Brock Bowers would probably be my preference if he's there because of the uncertainty with the medicals for the offensive lineman. But, if he's not there, I look at Troy Fautanu. I look at guys like Amarius Mims, Olu Fashanu. If he's still there, definitely see those being options as well.
It's tough. I keep making the argument for offensive tackle in my own head because like Tyron Smith is, you can almost lock down he's not going to make it through a full season. Like it's been a long time since he's gone through a full season. But I think in their arguments not to take a tight end too. I mean, we've talked about it before that the financial value of taking a tight end this early isn't as great as it is taking a more premium position like receiver, like tackle. You're not going to get that value with the rookie contract and a tight end that you would at other positions. But the more I come back to it, these are all these arguments that I make to myself are arguments I would make if I were like looking like long term. And I just don't think anyone on the Jets is doing that, right? I don't think they really care about a lot of those long-term concerns. They don't really care about the value. I think they care about getting a guy who's going to contribute in year one. If you take, Olu Fashanu at 12, he's probably going to have to step in, but in a best case scenario, you're crossing your fingers he doesn't see the field, right? And I'm not sure that's the best option when you've got a 40-year-old quarterback, you've got decision makers with their backs up against the wall. I think you're right that I think you maybe go for the more immediate weapon, and that probably is Bowers. I do think that also opens up the question, should the Jets be a team that's willing to move up a few spots here to get one of these receivers? Is the gap of adding in a Dunze, of adding in Neighbors to this offense that already has Garrett Wilson, that added Mike Williams over the offseason as a free agent, is adding a Neighbors or a Dunze to that crop over a Bowers? Is that worth maybe giving up? The Jets don't have a second round pick, right? Because they gave it for Aaron Rodgers. So you're probably giving future capital at that point. But is that something you would consider moving up for one of those receivers if they're still there?
I would consider it. I think they're kind of in the same boat as the Bears, where you have not quite as much as the Bears, because I think DJ Moore and Keenan Allen is a superior duo. I think Garrett Wilson is very good, but Mike Williams is coming off the injury, so there is some uncertainty there. But they're kind of in that situation where they have a solid wide receiver duo, but they could stand to have a wide receiver three to complete the trio, right, and really play off each other well. So you could make that move. Again, without that second rounder, you don't quite have as much capital to work with. But again, you mentioned it, man. I mean, Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, they're kind of feeling the heat. I think they're under pressure to produce right away. Things haven't gone well for them. Zach Wilson was obviously not an experiment that panned out. So, you're looking to really, and last year was supposed to be the year, right? Aaron Rodgers was coming in, a lot of hype. The roster was set. The defense was very good through the year. It looked like they were ready to compete. And so now you've delayed that timeline for a year. I think the pressure is on to produce right away. And so really just that this first year and then the next year, we're really going to learn what the future holds for Saleh and Douglas and whether they're going to stick around. So I think, looking at that truncated window, you might be more inclined to move up for a guy that you really, really like. The problem is there a guy that fits that profile for the Jets, and are they willing to do that? I think it's viable for sure, but without the capital, again, you're going to have to spend some 2025 capital, I think.
And I think so many of these decisions are driven by ownership and what ownership allows. And is the Jets ownership going to allow Joe Douglas to trade a 2025 pick, a 2026 pick when he might not be there? I don't know. I think that the owners have a much bigger hand in a lot of these decisions, especially in the top 10 when it comes to trades and moving up, than we might even give it credit for. And how the Jets owner thinks about this and how Woody Johnson feels might be kind of a determining factor here, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree for sure.
Vikings at 11. So we talked about the top 10, but we've got to include the Vikings here. I mean, I know they're at 11, but it seems just it would seem unbelievable if they stick at 11-23. Let's start there, because I think there are reports out there that the Vikings might very well stay at 11-23, especially if Drake May goes 3 to the Patriots and their best option is trading up for JJ McCarthy. There's a thought out there they might just stand pat. I think Charles Robinson from Yahoo Sports reported that they'd be happy taking Bo Nix at 11. We talked about silly season, Ian. Like, I don't know what to make of this. Like, is that silly season? I don't know. To me, it seems like the Vikings acquired that number 23 pick for a reason, right? And I know that Adam Schefter reported that the Texans may have initiated those talks and wanted to get out of the first round, but I just think it's going to look so silly if we sit here after the draft and the Vikings walk away with Bo Nix and I don't even know who they Latu at 23. I feel like it's going to be such a letdown for Vikings fans that expect them to move up to 4 or 5 here tomorrow.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the whole reason they got that 23rd pick was to package it for a move to 3 or 4 or 5. I think that's the window that you see them go. And I think that's, why we see the Vikings kind of pigeonholed as that team that is going to make it to that point, because they have first round capital. You have 3 first rounders right now in these next 2 years that you can use to tantalize the team within that range. If they don't make a move up, it feels like a waste a little bit, because they gave up a little bit to get that 23rd pick. And now you're getting, solid players. Yeah. But quarterback, you're kind of forced into an unfavorable outcome there. I think JJ McCarthy is a guy, I wouldn't spend 3 first rounders on him, but at the same time, again, we talked about it, getting him in the right supporting structure, right? If there's any place where he can reach his ceiling, it's Minnesota, with the coaching, with the offensive line, and with the weapons that they have. That is the place where he can reach that ceiling. So I can see it from Minnesota, right? But I don't think you make that move if you're not prepared to truly be aggressive for whoever is there at 3 or 4, right? And that's the tricky part, because we talked about it with New England. There's a viable outcome where New England just stands pat and takes Drake May. They're in the driver's seat there. So, I think Minnesota would really have to sell a couple farms to get them off that spot if they wanted to. So that's the tricky part. But, no, I think maybe there's a very, very fringe outcome where, they keep 11 and 23 because things didn't go their way. But I think if you're Minnesota, you only make that move, at least the way that I read it and the way I think you read it too, is, if you're getting that 23rd pick, you're gearing up to make a move. You don't have a poker face anymore. That's what you're doing. It's just a matter of where you can get in the door.
And it maybe there is a question of whether the Vikings have boxed themselves in, right? And everyone knows that they have to move up, and that gives those teams who are sitting there at 4 and 5 a lot of leverage. I think if they can say, hey, you're going to give us more and more and more until we're comfortable. And Monty Ossenford at number 4, the Cardinals GM, has already said that he's not going to make any moves until he's on the board, until he's on the clock Thursday night. So we're not going to see a move until then, but what's that package going to look like, Ian? I mean, is it going to take 11, 23, a 2025 first and more? I mean, I think that's what the precedent shows. Is it's going to take at least 3 first. And again, maybe if the Cardinals and Chargers feel like the Vikings are just so boxed in, maybe they get an extra second, maybe they get an extra third on top of that as some filler on the other end. But I'm right there with you that I think it would just look kind of ridiculous if the Vikings exit this draft not getting one of those top 4 quarterbacks.
Yeah, for sure. And there aren't a ton of precedents for this kind of move. I'm thinking back to the Goff move in 2016, where the Rams traded 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and 2 thirds to get up from 15 to number 1 overall. So that's one that's, somewhat of a parallel. For the Vikings, you're moving from 11 to either 3, 4, or 5, right? I think if the Patriots are willing to move off that 3rd spot, that is the key, which I don't know if I see that. May is too good of a quarterback prospect for me to think they would move off that. But if they are willing to do that, it would cost a lot for Minnesota. It would cost a lot, because you're trying to box out other teams too, but you're also trying to convince the Patriots to say, yeah, we can wait on a QB, I guess, right? Which that's always the toughest part, because a lot of teams they're either sold on QBs or they're not, right? So that's another element to it. But if it were for number 3, I'd say that Minnesota would have to put in those first 3 first-round picks by default, probably a 2nd rounder next year as well, maybe even some 2026 capital. I think it would cost a lot. And I think New England is in the driver's seat. Like, they can feign their intentions too. They can tell they might not be head over heels on May, but they can tell Minnesota, hey, we like him. Give us an offer that we can't refuse, right? And so then if Minnesota is in love with him, we're like, hey, we can't get out of the draft without this guy. And they've kind of worked themselves into a corner by getting 23. Maybe they're thinking, all right, let's sell the farm. Let's get this guy, because we have the weapons in place. We have the offensive line. We really can't come away from this draft without that guy. So they're boxed into a corner in a good way, right? Where you have enough supporting structure. You're not rushing anything, but you don't have a ton of choices. You don't have a ton of recourse if you don't get that guy. So for the Patriots, you can work a lot of capital out of that if you want to, if you play it right. But if you take Drake May, then they go to number 4 overall. The Vikings do number 4, number 5. And I don't think JJ McCarthy is the caliber of quarterback prospect that would command quite that much capital. I think with that, you might be able to get away with 11, 23 a first and maybe a second or a third. I think with that one, you get off a little easier, right? Still kind of painful, but again, you get a
Yeah.
QB who can survive in your system. So I think number 3 is really what would take the King's ransom if it's in play, if it's available, right? And that's the key. That's the thing we don't know. We don't know if the Patriots are going to trade down or if they're going to stand pat. But I think if the Vikings can get to 4 or 5 and take McCarthy, you're not getting the better QB prospect, but you're getting the more digestible trade outcome, I think.
So let's imagine that the Vikings do get this trade done. They go up to 4 or 5, they give up all these picks, and they do land JJ McCarthy. You have him at 26th on your board. He's the 4th quarterback behind May, Williams, and Daniels. I think it's pretty well acknowledged around the league that JJ McCarthy should not necessarily be chosen this high based on talent alone. But we talked about it. It's a good situation in Minnesota with the coaching and Kevin O'Connell's scheme. How would you kind of envision JJ McCarthy in this scheme in year one? Like, would you think he would play above Sam Darnold immediately? Do you think that he would benefit from some time sitting on the bench? How would you envision him kind of integrating himself into Minnesota's offense in his rookie year?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where you have some flexibility is that you don't have to play him right away if he's not catching it right away, right? And every QB, every young QB moves at a different pace. So you shouldn't feel like you have to start him at a certain point. But I think Sam Darnold is an experienced quarterback who's had a full offseason with Minnesota, right? So I think that will help. He can be a bridge QB. But I think schematically, JJ McCarthy does do a lot of the things that Minnesota will need him to do very well. I think in rhythm, on rhythm passes, short throws, he's got very clean mechanics. One thing that really stood out to me with his operational framework, I think his field vision, his processing can be a little hot and cold. That's where I think he stands to improve and acclimate to the NFL level. But one thing about, the throwing motion as a quarterback, your energy channel is very important. You got that back foot back. You got to carry that momentum from your lower body. You got to use that rotational torque in your hips, and you got to carry that through your release. And JJ McCarthy, for such a young QB, I think he keeps that energy channel flowing very well. There aren't any hitches in his process. Every time he rotates back, it's very clean. It's very, synchronous, his movements. So I think the clean mechanics on rhythm throws will help him a lot. I think he's very good off structure, out of structure, off platform as well. On those boot action rollouts and play action throws that Kevin O'Connell loved to implement with Kirk Cousins. I think JJ McCarthy fits with that as well. He can throw off platform. He's got the arm to do it. And then he's shown that he can operate kind of, step up in the pocket, keep his eyes downfield, and really test the middle of the field too with that fearlessness, right? I think the processing can be hot and cold, but a lot of the schematic things where you can hold the QB's hand a little bit, I think JJ McCarthy can operate with that. And then I think as you continue to acclimate him, as his processing gets a little more attuned to the NFL pace, I think he can keep growing. So yes, I think there is an outcome where, maybe you play Darnold for 4 or 5 weeks, let McCarthy get his feet wet, let him get comfortable, and then play him, let him take his lumps, because I think schematically there's enough in play to insulate him early on and then allow him to kind of grow into his play style at the NFL level.
So that's the top 10/11 there. And I really do feel like it's could be crazy tomorrow night. That first couple of hours when those first 10 or 11 picks goes off the board, there's just so many different avenues I think we could go down, and so many different options and trades that could shake up how this order goes, that I am so excited to see how that top 10 or 11 goes. But I really don't think it stops there, though, because there are more teams once you get further down the board. We go to 12 with the Broncos and 13 with the Raiders. Another 2 teams, Ian, that I think are very, very interested in moving up for a quarterback. Do they have what it takes, though, is the question, right? Sean Payton, he's been aggressive. He was aggressive when he was with the Saints. They moved up for Marcus Davenport. They were willing to trade future capital, move up in the draft. Seems like he'd be willing to do that for a quarterback, especially when they only have Zach Wilson and Jarrett Stidham on their roster. But are they going to be able to move up? And are the Raiders going to be able to move up? We mentioned that they're interested in Jaden Daniels. I'm sure they'd be interested in some of these other quarterbacks potentially as well. It seems tough to me to see how they would move up unless they're willing to get creative, right? Are the Broncos willing to include Patrick Surtain in a trade to move up, with the Giants or with the Cardinals, the Chargers? Are they willing to give up Patrick Surtain in a first-round pick to move up? I don't know. I think that's what they would have to do, though, if they did want to move up. And the Raiders, the same thing. I don't think that they're going to trade Max Crosby or anything like that to move up, but I think they'll have to get creative because they don't have the capital that the Vikings have on hand to move up.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the Raiders are the tough one because you've got that connection with Antonio Pierce, man. And it's difficult because the Commanders in the driver's seat there. Like they could take Jaden if they want, and maybe he could pull an Eli Manning. You know, we were kind of due for that, right? Because the last time was John Elway, right? So 20 years. We're kind of in a 20-year cycle, right? So we
Or
could see,
Eli Manning, yeah, 20 years
yeah,
ago, yeah.
John Elway and then Eli Manning, and
Johnny,
now
yes,
so
yes,
we're in a
yes.
20-year cycle. Maybe it's time, man. I don't know, but
We very well could be.
that would be fun. That would be fun. But I think the Raiders, I think the Broncos, the best outcome for the Broncos, in my opinion, and my stance has always been that one of Penix or Nix will go round one. I don't think they both go round one. I think it's going to be one or the other. I don't know which one. I think the best outcome for the Broncos is trading back and getting more capital because, again, they don't have a second rounder. That roster is pretty much in rough shape. I wouldn't trade away Pat Surtain. I would probably keep him off limits. I think he's too good of a player. I think he's one who's fits the core of this window and the next one. He's young enough for sure. But I think, you get that capital. And I think my mock draft that I released this past weekend kind of had the best outcome. You traded with the Cardinals. The Cardinals traded back a little bit. They did some moving, and they traded back up to 12 to get Terry and Arnold at QB, at CB. So they get 2 top 10 guys. You're the Broncos, you get 23 and 27, which the Cardinals got 23 from the trade up with the Vikings. And then you get Jared Verse at 23 if you want, or one of the edge guys that falls. And then Bo Nix at 27. I think that's a very good outcome because Bo Nix is a very good scheme fit for you. But then also, you're not drafting him too early. You're getting capital so you can support him, but also play the board. So I think that's the best outcome for the Broncos. Don't force yourself into a corner with these QBs. You definitely need a QB. Like, let's not skirt around that fact, but you don't want to rush it because that can just reset your clock again, and then you're stuck in the same situation you were in. So they're a little bit tougher. I think the Raiders have more capital to trade up if they want to, but again, the Commanders in the driver's seat for Jaden Daniels. The Patriots are in the driver's seat for Drake May. If they want to pick those guys, they're gone. They're off the board. And then you got 3 teams fighting for JJ McCarthy, and the Vikings have the capital to get that done too. So the Raiders kind of drew the short end of the stick. They could take Penix if they really wanted him. The mechanics can be a little inconsistent for such an older quarterback, right? 5-year starter, 24 years old, but he's got the competitive toughness. He's got the athleticism on the straight line plane. And then his drive velocity as a thrower is truly elite. He can fit the ball into very tight windows, outside the numbers, down the field. I think if he can keep fixing his mechanics, he can be a solid NFL starter. So 13 would be a little rich for me, but the QB tax is definitely, it's expensive. We see it every year. Going back to, 2022, Kenny Pickett went round 1, 21st overall. He was a mid to late day 2 guy for me. Michael Penix Jr. is kind of a fringe round 1 guy. He's my 33rd overall prospect. So it wouldn't be quite as much as a reach. It would be still kind of a slight reach. But again, you can rationalize it if you give him time to fix his mechanics and you can get him the proper support. Again, I think he can have that upside. So there's nuance to both of them. Either way, I think the Raiders and Broncos, they're the 2 teams in the worst position to get a QB in this class, and that's the reality of the matter. So if you're not in that position, my stance is don't force it. Let it come to you, and if it does, great. But don't force it. Don't be too aggressive because then you can get burned.
I think the operative word that you use there is rationalize, because I think that's what the Raiders are going to have to do if they take Penix at 13. But I'm absolutely not ruling that out. There's been a lot of noise that the Raiders are high on Michael Penix, that they're willing to take him as early as 13. And I would not be surprised if they do that, because to your point, they have an infrastructure in place to let him develop a little bit if they want to. I know he's an older prospect, but they signed Gardner Minshew of the offseason. He could start. Aiden O'Connell is still there. He started 10 games last year as a rookie. I think he's an option. So if you don't want to play Penix immediately, you don't have to. And I guess my thought is, if you're the Raiders and you're interested in taking Michael Penix at the end of round 1, whether that means trading back or whether trading from round 2 back into round 1, we talked about getting too cute earlier. It's like, man, if you like Michael Penix enough to take him at 28, I think you just take him at 13, right? If you like him that much, maybe you don't mess around and maybe you just take him, even if, you or I might not think Penix should go that high. The quarterback tax is going to push him up there. And if you're comfortable taking him at 20 something, maybe just take him at 13.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where the QB position is so trepidatious, right? If you don't get one at the right value, and you can draft one too high, you can wait too long and get beat out by another team, right? So there's so many different ways to play it. But the key thing for Michael Penix Jr., I think, is are you won over by the character, right? Because I think the talent is there for sure. I think the resilience is there. Absolutely. I think the medicals wasn't flagged at the combine, right? So each team is going to do their own individual evaluation. But he's stayed healthy those last 2 years in Washington, so that was a good sign for sure. But I think the biggest thing is, these little mechanical aberrations that we see that precipitate with bad accuracy at times and situational placement. Does he have the mentality and the awareness of that to assume that he would be able to improve that and fix that, right? This is the biggest thing.
Mm.
I know he wrote a piece in the Players Tribune recently where he was talking about his resilience and his toughness. And I think those are A+ traits to have for a QB. And Penix definitely has them to the highest degree, right? And he's got the talent as well. That's not a question either. It's just, can he fix those things that he needs to improve at, or is he more set in his ways? Because if he's more set in his ways, you might be looking at 4 or 5 years down the line, leveling out again, and you're still in need of a quarterback. So that's the risk you run. But no, I agree with you completely. If you're willing to take them back end of round 1, I don't think it's too much of a reach to just make sure you get your guy with the capital you have. And I think that's why you see so many mock drafts, you go across the board. I remember reading a Daniel Jeremiah one where he had Bo Nix going number 12 to the Broncos. And then you had Michael Penix Jr. going to 13 to the Raiders at times, right? Like, these are guys that we have I have them in that 30 to 35 range. So I wouldn't quite take them there, but QB is such an important position. If you can rationalize it again, like you said, like we both said, sometimes that's the way to do it, just to ensure that you get your guy.
Let's talk about some of these other teams that we think could end up trading up, and maybe not for a quarterback, but for other positions. If the teams sometimes find targeted specific guys they want to move up for, especially if it's only a couple spots and it's not one of these huge moves up the board. A couple of guys, a couple of teams I think could move up. The Colts, I think, need another offensive weapon to give to Anthony Richardson, whether that's Brock Bowers or whether it's one of these receivers. I think they need to be in the market to add another guy and make Michael Pittman more of that high-end wide receiver too that I think he is. Chris Ballard, the Colts GM, is never that aggressive in free agency, but I'd like to see him get more aggressive in this draft, move up. I don't know if it'd probably take till 9, 10, move up maybe a couple picks, be in the market for one of these receivers, be in the market for a Bowers. I don't know. Is that something you think could be realistic? I'm not sure. Like, I've seen that the Colts might be interested in Xavier Worthy maybe at 15. One way or another, I think that the Colts need to use this first round pick on getting another pass catcher for Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a few outcomes. You could get a pass catcher. You could get a corner. Quinyon Mitchell is a very good scheme fit for Gus Bradley, right? So I think that's an option as well.
Yeah.
But Brock Bowers, man, if he's there, I think that's just too good to pass up. And we were talking about him as an option for the Jets at number 10. So I think, you got to get past a couple teams to get him there. But Shane Steichen loves to threaten defenses vertically up the seam, right? I think Brock Bowers fits that perfectly with his speed and his catching instincts. But then you can also scheme touches in the short range with Anthony Richardson, give him an outlet to work with in the short range too. So, I think Brock Bowers is too good of a fit for me to pass up. But then at wide receiver as well, if you want Brian Thomas Jr., he's a very good fit on the vertical plane with those slot fades and those 9 routes and his tracking ability. And then you've got guys like Xavier Worthy, like you said, who's that elite speed threat. That 4.2 140, man. I don't know where he's going to go, but that's the type of speed that we haven't seen before, right? So it's one of those things where it could inflate his stock a little bit higher. I'm not sure who they take there, who they prefer. I think Brock Bowers, if he is there, that's something that it would be really tough to pass up for me, just because I think you re-sign Michael Pittman. You have Josh Downs as that fast, twitchy, explosive slot guy too. So I think Brock Bowers can kind of fit the mold where you can play him in line, you can play him outside in the slot a little bit, you can move him off motions and scheme touches to him. I think he fits that caliber thing. And then you can get a receiver in round 2 or round 3 if you want to.
Yeah.
Ricky Pearsall, Roman Wilson, Jermaine Burton, if you're willing to take a risk on the character off the field, there are options as well. So I think tight end, you have a lot of receivers who can fit that vertical scheme. You don't have a lot of weapons in the mold of Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is one of one. I think if he's there, you got to take him.
You mentioned Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's a guy that teams could end up moving for too. I wonder if the Eagles are a team to move up. We've heard rumors that they might move up for a cornerback. I wonder if they could try and get ahead of the Seahawks at number 17 to go for Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold. And I think some of the news that we saw just before we came on, Ian, is that Trey Hendrickson from the Bengals, who has requested a trade out of Cincinnati. The Bengals have a lot of history of players requesting trades out of Cincinnati, and it normally doesn't end up working for the player. So I don't know if this will have all that much of an effect on how the Bengals draft at 18, but I think you at least have to add the idea of an edge rusher like a Latu, like a Chop Robinson, like a Jared Verse at 18, just on the off chance that Trey Hendrickson isn't a Bengal in 2024.
Yeah, for sure. And if Trey does get traded, I would probably want an edge rusher who can hit the ground running as that pass
Yeah.
rushing force. So Latu would probably be the guy for me. 6'5", 260. Again, we talked about the fluidity, the hand usage. He's one of the best pass rushing technicians that I've seen, both with his initial pass rush plan and his ability to stack counters as well. So if Hendrickson goes out the door, right? Well, right on the draft, it's the draft eve, so I have a hard time thinking something happens right away. But we've seen crazier things happen. It could happen, and if it does, Latu becomes an option. Round 2, if you want Adisa Isaac from Penn State, I could see him being an option. Marshall and Needland in round 2 as well from Western Michigan. There are potential choices for them. I think that's something to keep on the radar. I think Miles Murphy's development also plays into it as well. Do you expect a leap in year 2? But edge is one of those positions you don't want to skimp at. And the Bengals did sign Trent Brown at right tackle. So they have a short-term duo there at tackle where they're not forced into any particular outcome. So if you really like Latu, if you want to get that future utility, I think it depends on how you feel about Hendrickson and what's actually going to happen there. But I could definitely see them hedging for that with Latu. I think that would be the top choice if that ends up being a hole they need to fill.
One pick later, we've got the Rams, who have not used a first round pick, and I think since 2016. So we're at 8 years now. They have not used a first round pick. I'm curious about what they're going to do, Ian. I've seen some rumors that they could try and trade up for one of these top 3 receivers. I would love to see a wide receiving core of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp and Roma Odunze. I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun to me. I don't know how viable that is to move up. I think how far it would take the Rams to get into that range. What do you think the Rams doing here? They don't have Aaron Donald anymore, but they did go out in free agency and fill a lot of holes, especially in the defensive backfield with Tre'Davious White and Cam Kroll on the back end. They added a lot of pieces. Do you think they'll go offense? Do you think they'll go defense? It seems like their board should be kind of open to go in any number of directions, but what do you see, and could you see a trade up in round 1?
Yeah, and I think most mock drafts have had them picking one of those edge rushers at 19.
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that Chop Robinson or Jared Verse is there. So that value lines up a lot for sure. But I could see them trying to get a receiver, right? I think you got Tutu Atwell, who's a solid depth guy, a vertical guy for sure. But and Demarcus Robinson's a good veteran, right? But Cooper Kupp, you got Puka Nacua. I think getting that vertical guy to complete that package could really be a fun thing. And you got Brian Thomas Jr. If he's on the board at number 19, I think the Steelers they present the floor for him. I think he does get past the Steelers because they like him a lot. I think if he's there, the Steelers take him. So if you're the Rams, maybe you want to snipe him a little bit, because I look at, the different ways that, Sean McVay can use those guys, get them opportunities off motions and sweeps and things like that. Brian Thomas Jr. fits well into that, but then he also has the vertical speed to stretch the field and create space for Kupp and Nacua to work underneath. So really good way that they play off each other. That'll be a lot of fun to watch. But I have a hard time. It's difficult because this wide receiver class, again, you can get a guy in round 2 or round 3 if you want. And we know that Sean McVay can scheme guys up, right? I look at the edge class. You got that group of 4, Latu, Robinson, Verse, and Turner in round 1. And then after that, it does fall off a little bit. So if you need a premier edge rusher, which the Rams, they just lost Aaron Donald as well. So I think the pressure is on to keep the talent core, at a maximum in that defensive line room. Maybe you want to get a guy like one of those top edge rushers, right? You could get a defensive tackle too. You could get Byron Murphy II if he's still there. Looks like he's going to go top 15, so I'm not sure. But again, you could go in that route too. So I think the trenches feels like the area they go. I think edge is still the way to go. But if there is a receiver that falls a little bit, like let's say Roma Odunze somehow falls to number 9 or number 10, you're willing to trade up for him, right? I think that's a scenario where the Rams would be aggressive, because not only would he be a perfect fit to scheme open and the upside would just be immense, but the Rams have also proven with less need that they can make the most out of those day 3 picks. So I think they're willing to roll the dice a little bit and just kind of fill out the roster later, because they know how to find those diamonds in the rough.
Yeah, and they have been willing to trade picks, although I will say it's been mostly for veteran guys. Like I'm wondering, are they willing to do the same thing to do it in the draft, to get a guy who's hasn't proven himself yet, but does come with a cheaper contract and maybe more upside than getting a veteran guy. So I think that's interesting.
And while we're on the topic of trades, I think we had a question from Jeffrey McCowan.
We do.
On screen. Do you think it's more likely the Lions trade up or down The Lions have traditionally been a team that trades up, I think, when they're aggressive. And I think they're in a position this year where they can be aggressive. I think the roster is pretty strong across the board. A lot of the holes that they did have, they at least made moves to kind of, strengthen the levy in free agency, right? They signed, I think, Kevin Zietler at guard in free agency.
Yep.
Frank Ragnow is back as well. They traded for Carlton Davis, a corner who he's got some injury issues. But again, if he can stay healthy, a solid player as well. Marcus Davenport as an edge, who's more of a rotational guy, but again, I think raises the floor for you. So I think if you're the Lions, if a player like we talked about Dallas Turner, we mentioned him earlier, right? If he doesn't go to the Falcons at number 8, there's an outcome where maybe Dallas Turner falls to the mid to late teens. And if that happens, I could definitely see the Lions trade up. I think the Seahawks at number 16 are a potential trade down option. The Seahawks definitely need more capital, and also their needs, interior offensive line, things like that, don't line up super well at number 16. So I think they could be a candidate to trade up with if you want. But I think for the Lions, the biggest thing for me, if Dallas Turner falls, or if they really want Brian Thomas Jr. or Xavier Worthy, I think they could trade up for one of those guys too. But that's kind of my thought process. I think if one of those guys fall, they trade up. If not, they can stand pat at 29 and get maybe Darius Robinson or Johnny Newton, someone to strengthen the D line.
Yeah, Darius Robinson is who I sent them in my final mock draft, and I think you could make the argument for moving back too, right? I think that if you feel like you want to have a long-term replacement for Zeitler, Frank Ragnow has a lot of health issues that maybe are not going to let him play very much longer. So if you feel like you can find a mid-round interior option that you like on day 2 or day 3, maybe you do move back out of the first round. If somebody wants to get a quarterback, get an extra pick in round 2 or round 3. They do still have a 3rd round pick, even though they traded a 3rd for Carlton Davis. They do have another 3rd round pick, but I do wonder they have a need at cornerback. Cameron Sutton unfortunately had some off-field issues and was released this offseason. So even though they did add Carlton Davis, it's kind of a net neutral there at cornerback. So I think that's maybe still a need too. So yeah, a lot of options there, I think, at the back end of round 1 for the Lions, and wouldn't really be surprised either way, I think, on Detroit.
Yeah, a player that would potentially be interesting for them real quick would be Cooper DeJean. I don't think he'd be a great fit for the press man CB looks that they run, but they did release Tracy Walker at safety as well. So he could play safety alongside Kirby Joseph. He could play corner in zone looks where the down distance is a little bit longer. You've got Brian Branch in the slot already as well. I know they brought back Emmanuel Mosley, but he has some injury issues too. So I could see Cooper DeJean being an intriguing fit with them. I don't know if it'd be a perfect one, but again, intriguing to me.
Yeah, I mean, they lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. I mean, they're kind of similar players, right? As safeties who can play the slot too. So I think that makes a lot of sense as kind of a replacement there. Let's keep moving down in round 1 for potential trade teams. Buffalo Bills. Now they obviously lost Gabe Davis. They traded Stephon Diggs. They're so far back in the first round, down at 28, that I think it's just going to be too much, I think, for them to get up for one of those top receivers. I've seen too much to not discuss it though. Like the idea is out there that can the Bills go up and get a Malik Neighbors? Can they get a Rome Odunze? I think where the Bills are in their kind of roster building, purging so many veterans this offseason, it's not a rebuild. You're never going to rebuild with Josh Allen at quarterback, but I think it's definitely a little bit of a reset where, to me, that just kind of clashes with the idea of giving up next year's first round pick or more picks. It clashes with that idea, right? I think those two ideas are kind of separate, where I do think the Bills need a receiver. Clearly, I mean, Curtis Samuel is their top wide receiver. They clearly need an upgrade there. I just don't think it.
No Curtis Samuel slander.
It's not Curtis. It's not slander. I'm not sure is he cut out as a wide receiver 1 in 2024. I've got my doubts about that. I just think it's going to be too hard for them to move up, and I just think they'll have to sit there and pick who kind of falls in. Maybe they move up a few spots, but getting into the top 10, it just seems it's too much to ask at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a leap too far, right? It's one of those things where it's probably not realistic. I think the best thing for the Bills is, you can play the board a little bit with this receiver class if you want to. I think there are a few guys kind of in that fringe top 10 range of the position who could be decent options at number 28, maybe slight reaches on my board. But again, I can see it because of the fit in that offense. And Xavier Legette, I know the size speed profile would be a lot of fun with Josh Allen. Jalen Polk from Washington, one of my guys, my 36th overall player. I think a lot of the ways that he wins is similar to Puka Nacua, actually. And they're actually similarly sized too. 6'1", 203, 32-inch arms. And he's very alignment versatile. You can move him around a little bit. He's got very good body control, hand strength at the catch point. He converts time and time again. So for Josh Allen, who likes to, hit those tight window throws with his arm strength and velocity, Jalen Polk could be a really nice option as well. So that could be one. Ladd McConkey as well. Here's the thing with the Bills, though. Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, both guys who don't have that size element. So I would try and find a guy who can add a little more size, can box out DBs, Xavier Legette, Keon Coleman, maybe AD Mitchell if you're comfortable with the off-field stuff. I don't think it's too pressing. It's more, we've heard that he's a type 1 diabetic. If that's the case, if that's the issue, then if you're an NFL team with a full nutrition staff, I'd like to think that you can, work with that and kind of manage.
You hope so. You hope so.
I think if that's what it is, it's a little more, it gives me a little more solace, right? So, for the Bills in particular, I like a lot of these guys, but I look at the guys that have the size element that they don't currently have in that room. And to me, that's a little more important right now. If you can find the best balance, I think that's even better. Jalen Polk, AD Mitchell, I think they bring the best balance when you look at it within that lens. But there are a lot of options at 28. And if you want to trade back a little bit too, trading up is tough, because I think you would have to trade up if you want Brian Thomas Jr. I think that's the prime target, because he's my 17th overall player. If you can trade up into the teens, you can get him. But there are a lot of teams. The Rams we talked about as a potential option for him. The Steelers are the floor, I think. So you got to get to 18 at least. So, looking at that, I think the likelier outcome for the Bills is staying put at 28 and getting a guy, or trading back into round 2. And you have the round 2 pick. You don't have a round 3 pick, but you can double up if you want as well. So, there is that flexibility too. I think the best thing is, playing the board, being patient, and really just capitalizing on that kind of 6 to 12 range at wide receiver if you want.
Okay, one more team I do want to talk about a potential trade. The Commanders don't have a left tackle right now. Like they just straight up do not have a left tackle. They released Charles Leno. They've got Braden Daniels there, was a 4th-round pick last year, but he missed his entire rookie season with a torn rotator cuff. They could go out and sign a free agent after the draft, sure, but I do wonder if Adam Peters is going to package some of these many picks that he's got on day 2 and 3 and say, can we get back into the first round and get one of these offensive tackles from this deep class? Is there a guy, Ian, you think that would fit for them at the end of round 1? I don't know, somewhere in the 24 to 32 range, that they could maybe package 36 and 40 or 36 and one of their other late round picks, move up and feel good about having a left tackle option. So Jaden Daniels or Drake May, whoever it may be at center, isn't just running for cover on every snap back there.
Yeah, for sure. I think Joel Olufashanu will probably be out of range, although Olufashanu could fall. If he falls in the 20s, I know he's a top 10 guy for me. So I don't see it happening, but we've seen crazier things happen again, and we know that the consensus ranking isn't uniform. So he could fall. And if he does, if Fashanu fell to like 20, I would be all over that, or 19 probably, because I think the Steelers would take him if he was at 20. But that's an option for sure. I think Taliesin Fuaga, JC Latham, probably not there, and Latham is more of a natural right tackle anyway. I think for the Commanders in particular, I think you're looking at 2 guys, Troy Fautanu or Amarius Mims. I think those are the top options for you. And Fautanu could fall because of the knee issue, right? The knee could be flagged, and that might cause him to fall down the board if he comes to a certain point. And if you're Washington and you cleared him, then I look at that and you could make an investment in that. He's a phenomenal player. I think he's got the athleticism, the flexibility, the hand usage. I think he has all of the traits that you need to be that high-level starter right away. And then he can play the guard if you need him to as well. Amarius Mims is one of those guys who's got the athleticism, the length, the power as well. The injuries are a concern for him too, though. So you wonder about that. But I think the Cowboys at 24 are a wild card as well. My roommate just walked in. He's got a bunch of plastic bags, so you might hear that. What's up, Matt? How you doing? Doing good? Matt. Hey, Matt. Yeah, Matt's making a cameo here. All right. So, but yeah, you got a couple guys who have some medical issues, so that might be a concern. But I think the Cowboys 24 are a wild card, because I think the Cowboys could take Amarius Mims if they feel good about him. The medical checks are the key thing. Some teams pass guys, some teams don't. But I think Fautanu, Mims are the best options. And Fautanu would be a phenomenal pick. He's my 13th overall player. So if the Commanders feel good about the medicals, he can walk in and be a really good blindside blocker right away. Mims is a little bit less developed, but some of the things that you would like him to, be good at such a young age, like leverage acquisition and extension timing and placement, he is very good at. So I think either one is a really good investment for them if they want to trade up. Fautanu for me would be the preference, though.
I think if you look at the trade calculators, the various trade calculators out there, if the Commanders package 36 and 40, I think it could get them to around 16 or 17. So like if the Jaguars want to move out, for example, I think it was something like a mid-third round pick worth of surplus value. So I think that'd be a pretty fair trade if the Commanders want to move up and target a guy they need. Okay, let's get into, we talked a lot about teams here. Let's get into some of our favorite team and player fits, Ian. Like we've done so many mock drafts. I've done so many, you've done so many, that we've almost considered like all these possibilities in our mind, right? It's like just all this data and potential combinations going around in our mind that we've thought about so many combinations. Who are some of your favorite player team fits that you'd really like to see go in round one?
Yeah, one that stands out to me, if he goes at 17th overall, would be Terry Arnold to the Jaguars. I think he's a perfect fit for that press man scheme with Ryan Nielsen. I think, a lot of things that Arnold does well. Let's talk about the limitation, right? The vertical
Yeah.
speed. He ran a 4.5 40-yard dash, so he doesn't quite have that elite range over top. But in Ryan Nielsen's scheme, where you're dictating route depth and release depth, I think he's got the physicality, the foot speed, the fluidity to do that. So I think it's not as much of a concern in that type of scheme. He's got the ball skills, the physicality. I think would be a perfect fit for them as well. So Terry Arnold to the Jaguars, number 17 is good. I know I wrote a bunch of them down, so I'm gonna check.
No, I like that because
Yeah.
the Jags did sign Ronald Darby this offseason to play corner opposite Tyson Campbell, but I don't think Ronald Darby is necessarily a guy you want as a full-time starter. He's better as that fourth guy off the bench. So if you can get a Terry Arnold and a Tyson Campbell, and then you've got Darnell Savage playing the slot, like that's a much better cornerback situation than the Jags were dealing with last year. And I agree that Arnold, from a scheme specific standpoint, would be the guy. Do you think they would take him over Quinton Mitchell if both were available? Do you think that they would take Terry Arnold over Mitchell just for the scheme stuff, even though Mitchell's the better athlete? I think. Like, how would you view those two guys if they're both there for Jacksonville?
Yeah, I think. Hey, can you pause for a second? Just a second. Thank you. He got the groceries. Thank you. I appreciate that, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the grocery. But I think here's the thing. Quinton Mitchell would probably. He's got the recovery speed for sure, and he's got the ball skills as well. I think Terry Arnold is the better scheme fit, but here's the thing. Trent Baalke, right? General manager for the Jaguars. He does like to bank on those higher upside guys. Usually, Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson, that was the big discussion with them. So I think he could bank on the recovery speed if you want. I think Quinton Mitchell is more of an off-man zone fit, but he did show at the Senior Bowl that he can play breast man if you need him to. So, I could see him projecting with that. Me personally being the evaluator, right? Like if I had to pick, I would prefer Terry Arnold, but again, I can see Baalke liking Quinton Mitchell over that. Looking at the measurements and the testing numbers and saying, let's bank with that. Let's go with that. Even though I think Arnold is a very good athlete, I just think in a different type of way. But I could see him being really tantalized by what Mitchell has to offer.
Yeah. Okay. Let me give you one of my team player fits and see what you think. I like the idea of Graham Barton going to the Seahawks a lot. I really do. Like, the Seahawks need some options on the interior offensive line. They added a couple guys. They added Laken Tomlinson, right? They drafted Olu Oluwatimi last year, but Graham Barton is a guy who I think could play multiple positions. He could play center or guard, maybe tackle. I'm curious if you think Graham Barton could play right tackle in the NFL if needed. But I think he's like a really good fit there. As high floor. I don't know if the ceiling is there as some of the other offensive line options that could be on the board, but I think it's a really high floor. And for a team like the Seahawks that I don't really know where the Seahawks are at right now, right? They've got like John Schneider's calling the personnel shots for the first time. New head coach, Pete Carroll's gone. Pretty good roster that can win now, but could also add some depth. Like, they're in such a weird spot that Barton feels like a guy who is just kind of a catch-all, right? He will be a solid option. It feels like the floor is that high. I don't know if you like that fit. Like, what do you think about that? Maybe 16's too early. Maybe 17's too early. Maybe the mid-round's too early. Maybe a trade back. I don't know. What's your thought of Barton to Seattle?
So he's my 24th overall player, so I can definitely see him going to them in round one. I think the Seahawks are one of those teams that they've been posited as a potential trade down candidate, and you look at the Eagles at 22, that might be a good swap because the Eagles love to be aggressive and trade up for guys that they really like. The Seahawks need some more day two capital. I think it's a really good match, and I think it would fit well. Graham Barton would be a better value in the early 20s range, but I do think, again, like you said, catch-all. I think that's the perfect term for it because he can play center, he can play guard, anything you want on the interior. I think his drive really translates well. High IQ blocker in the run game, but also has the pass protection ability. He can play square. He's got active hands, really athletic as well. I think that gets glossed over because he's so good at a lot of the little things that you forget, how explosive and free flowing this guy is. So I like him a lot. I think he's a great fit for the Seahawks. Not as flashy as you would want, right? But I think, again, offensive line, people talk about the flash and they look at the flash, but if you have a good offensive lineman, that helps your offense operate, that helps raise your floor and your ceiling. So I think it's a great pick. I think Cooper DeJean would be another great fit for Seattle. I think with Mike McDonald's scheme, the ways that you can use them. They released Quandre Diggs, so they have a void at safety next to Julian Love. I think he could play safety, or swap out the nickel spot with Devin Witherspoon. I think Devin
Mm.
Witherspoon can play against smaller, faster wide receivers. Cooper DeJean can be that tight end mismatch guy. I think he can play corner in cover 3 heavy schemes. I see a comment saying he's a corner. I think he can play corner in certain schemes, man. I think he can. I think especially cover 3 where he's playing side saddle, he's got the speed and the instincts to play that. It's more impress man and off man where I'm a little more concerned. Off man, not as much because he can pedal, he can stay square, he can transition, but impress man, where you have to match and mirror guys and make sharp redirections, that's where I'm a little more concerned because he's a little muscle bound, a little stiff in the hips sometimes. And I think that's where the limitations can show up. So if you're in cover 3 looks on longer down and distance, I think he can play cover 3 corner. Otherwise, I would rotate him in nickel safety. And that's the fun part. I think he's so smart, so intelligent, such a good route recognition player and a playmaker at the catch point. And he's very physical in support too. So I think you can play him as kind of that mix and match piece and just let him roam and be a rover around the secondary and just play him where his strengths are. I think that's the fun part with him. So yeah, he can. It's tough, but I like him as kind of that mix and match, that chess piece at DB. I don't think you see that very often.
Yeah, we talked about it last week. Mike McDonald got the most out of Kyle Hamilton last year. He got the most out of Daxton Hill when he was Michigan's defensive coordinator. Cooper DeJean is very much in that same mold, and I think would be a good piece for them. I mean, they signed Rayshawn Jenkins, but I don't think anybody in Seattle is counting on Rayshawn Jenkins for the long term at safety. Ian, give me another fit here from your list that you like, that you really want to see in the first round. Is there another guy that stands out who you think could fall to like a perfect destination on Thursday night?
I'm looking at my list here. I don't know if it's going to happen because I think the Ravens have been tied to offensive linemen a little more often. But if Xavier Worthy ends up going there,
yeah,
Xavier Worthy with Todd Monken, man, that would be the perfect fit. That would
so
be
much fun
because he's a speed guy, but he knows how to use it as a route runner. But then you can scheme him touches as rack threat off motions. I think for his size, he's pretty wiry. He's got some nice contact balance, right? It surprises you, right? 172 pounds, and there are reps where he's bouncing off tackles, staying on his feet, and then just exploding into space too. So the ways that Todd Monken would be able to scheme him would be very fun. And then another one at wide receiver, Jalen Polk. We talked about him earlier to the Chiefs, man. I think that would be a phenomenal fit. I think especially with Rashee Rice, the uncertainty with the legal situation there. I think Jalen Polk is a guy again who can play movement Z. He can expand across alignments wherever you need him to play off motions. He can run routes off motions. He's very fluid. I think his route tree can stand to expand. But Andy Reid, his bread and butter is scheming guys into advantageous situations. That's what made Rice so successful as a rookie. Is Reid just schemed him into situations where he could use his best traits, his explosiveness, his rack ability. Jalen Polk, I think, is one of those guys who has that rack for sure, but he's one of the best catchers of the football in this class. The body control, never claustrophobic at the catch point. He's got strong hands. I think he would be a phenomenal safety blanket for Patrick Mahomes. I think he gives that stability that they're still kind of lacking in that position.
Jalen Polk has become, on the PFN Bengals podcast, Jay Morrison and I have been sending Polk to the Bengals in round 2, like in every mock draft. So if he's going to go at the end of round 1, I mean, that's really going to mess up our mock draft. So I don't know how I feel about that, but he's been getting a lot of steam. I would not be surprised to see him go there either. And, I think maybe the Chiefs, if they don't consider a receiver, I think they could go offensive tackle. They're another team that doesn't really have a true starting left tackle right now. I think that the whole end of this kind of round 1 area with the Ravens, who lost both of their starting guards, and Morgan Moses, who we mentioned, the 49ers, who are bringing back the same offensive line that got them to the Super Bowl. But I don't think there's any doubt that they could use an upgrade at probably 3 of 5 spots, plus a long-term successor for Trent Williams at left tackle. He's 35, 36 years old. And then I think obviously the Chiefs at 32. All of those guys I think could consider offensive tackle. The guy I had one of my fits for these late picks that I like is Jordan Morgan to the 49ers. And I think you mentioned if he doesn't go to the Ravens, which I think he's a good fit for both teams. I think as a tackle who could play guard maybe in year 1, he's got the mobility that could fit in those schemes that those teams would like. Is he a guy you think could sneak in here at the end of round 1 and be a starting guard immediately and maybe be a tackle in year 2?
I think he could. I think he projects better at guard. I think, his sub 33-inch arms, and then hand usage is good, but there are some aberrations with the placement and the counter work as well that would maybe make me think he projects a little bit better inside. I comp him to I think he compares pretty favorably to Matthew Bergeron from last cycle, actually, Syracuse, who went to the Falcons in round 2. Yeah. They kind of they have similar frame dimensions, really high energy athletes, but that energy can work against them sometimes, where sometimes they play themselves out of proper positioning on their kick when they're matching guys to the apex, right? That's the biggest thing for me. And I think he has the power drive, the explosion to function really well on the interior as a guard. And we saw with Bergeron, that experiment really panned out right away at guard as a rookie for the Falcons. He was an impact starter. So I think Jordan Morgan kind of has that similar profile. Could you let him stick at tackle? Could you let him fail at tackle before moving him to guard? Absolutely. And I think he has the athleticism and the recovery ability to translate there and kind of counteract that length. But, when I have an undersized guy at tackle, I want them to be elite hand fighters to counteract that, before I move them inside. I think, Peter Skronsky was closer to the point and he still got moved into guard. Rashawn Slater was probably the consummate example of that, where he doesn't have elite size, but he's got the athleticism. He's a technician. He can stay at tackle. Jordan Morgan, to me, can get to that point, but he's not quite there yet. So I think you could move him to guard. And if you want, you can play him at guard early on and then, groom him to be that successor at left tackle long term. I think that's an option as well. I think you have flexibility, but I think he translates a little better inside long term.
All right. We're coming up on almost 2 hours here. So I think we're almost getting ready to wrap up, but I can't let us end this session without getting Ian's guys, right? You have watched as much tape as anybody this cycle. You've watched I don't know if you watched every player who's draft eligible, but it certainly seems like it. You've written reports on hundreds of guys. You've watched every single guy who's going to be kind of involved in this 3-day event. So I want to get who are your guys? Who, if you're in a draft room, Ian, if you're in a scouting staff, who would you get on the table for? And I want to put some parameters on it, right? So I want to see a guy who's in the top 50 of our industry consensus boards. So all the consensus boards out there, all the boards, put them together. In the top 50, who is your guy that you would kind of get on the table for, bang the table for, and say, we want this guy come hell or high water?
Top 50 on the consensus board, obviously the first 2 quarterbacks, Drake May, Caleb Williams. That goes without saying. If I had a chance to get either of those guys, they're graded high enough where, yes, I'm doing everything I can to do that. But that's a cop out. Those 2 guys are a cop out. So in the top,
that's too easy. That's too easy. I can't let you get away.
It's too easy. I know. And I'm getting past it. Don't worry. I'm not a pushover. I'll go with Mike Sainer still for my top 50 guy. If I had a chance to get Mike Sainer still, I would get on the table for him. I think he's a high level nickel defender, starter right away in the NFL, but he can play boundary. He can play safety if you need him to. He's best fit predominantly at nickel, primary fit there, but he has the flexibility to expand across alignments. I think, his route intelligence to me is some of the best that I've ever seen for a DB. I mean, his pass off and carry rules and zone, to a T. He's like a robot, man. He's always making the right call. He's fluid. He's explosive. He's very tenacious in support. He's a demon as a blitz threat, man, just always coming at 150%. And then he's a former wide receiver, so he's got the instincts at the catch point too, So, he's got all the traits. And then I got a chance to talk with him a little bit at the NFL Combine, and he really catches you off guard because he's very, very quiet, kind of, mild mannered when you're talking to him, like very, very mellow. But then on the football field, man, something else comes out. And he just plays with that unhinged tenacity. And he's intelligent too. He plays fast and confident, and he makes the right calls. Some guys are fast and confident, but they're reckless. I think Sainer still, he's so fast and confident as a player because he's a fast processor. He sees things fast. He knows how to play the game. And I love it. I think he'd be a glue guy, a playmaker right away. He's one of my guys. I've probably talked about him for 5 minutes already, so I'm gonna wrap it up. But Sainer still is, and you can tell this is a guy that I would get on the table for. Like, you can tell with the way I talk about him. Sainer still one of my guys for sure.
Do you have a comp for him that you like? Like, is there a guy that you could maybe compare him to? The one guy I keep thinking of is and you can totally tell me if this is off base, is like Casey Hayward, who could play the slot, was maybe best in the slot, but can also play outside at times. Like, they're similar body types. I don't know. Is there a guy that you've got in mind for Sainer still?
Casey Hayward is an interesting one because the playmaking is definitely there. I think, a lot of people have said Mike Hilton as that nickel defender who's really physical from downhill. I was thinking Kenny Moore for the Colts, who's been one of the best slot defenders in the league for the past few years. The athletic profiles are similar. I think the playmaking, but then also in support coming downhill, both as a run defender, but then also a blitzer. He's got that ability too. So I think there's multiple comps that play well. Kenny Moore is the one I went with just because I think the athletic profiles match the best. A little undersized, but very explosive, has the speed, has the playmaking, and just can be a really disruptive two-phase player from the nickel spot.
Okay, let's make it a little harder here. Let's go with somebody who's on the consensus board in that 50 to 100 range. So somebody who is in the day 2 to 3 range, but you feel pretty comfortable about taking maybe early on day 2. Is there somebody in that range that you really like?
Yeah, for sure. Jalen Polk is one, but we've talked about him enough. So for
Yeah.
those of you, if there's anyone who's just now joining Jalen Polk, I think he has a lot of similar elements to Puka Nakua. I think he fits that Puka profile, right? Alignment versatility, strong hands. He can separate, he can convert. I think he can be a very good utility piece for an offense. But Ben Sinnott from Kansas State is the other one for
Mm.
me. He was in the 50 to 100 range on the consensus board. I think he's my 46th overall player on my board. So I would take him in round 2. He's my tight end 2. I think he has some Dallas Clark to him, man. He's very fluid for his size, 6'4", 250, very well versed as a route runner. He's got a full route tree. He can play H-back, inline, big slot, wherever you need him to. Good rack threat, very physical in all phases. And he's got strong hands over the middle as well. So I think looking at the impact Sam Laporta had as a rookie, I think Ben Sinnott can have a similar impact in the right scheme. If you know how to use him, he can be a target funnel, plain and simple. So I like him a lot. I think he gets slept on. I think there's kind of a lack of consensus over who tight end 2 is in this class. But for me, it ended up not being very close. It was Brock Bowers for tight end 1. It was Ben Sinnott on an island for tight end 2. And then you go down the board to guys like Jared Wiley, Jatavian Sanders, Cade Stover, Theo Johnson, Tanner McLaughlin, guys like that. But Ben Sinnott, to me, was separated at the top. I think he has the all-encompassing versatility. I think he has the full receiving palette. And I think he has the rack ability to be a 3-level threat with additional blocking value and versatility as well. So big fan of Ben Sinnott. Definitely a guy that I would take round 2.
Okay, last one here. Now we're going to make it really tough. A guy outside the top 150 on the consensus board. So this is somebody maybe in the middle rounds that you would consider taking a little bit earlier. Probably someone that most people, including myself, have maybe never even heard of. Who do you like outside the top 150 as kind of that sleeper pick?
This isn't really tough. Are you kidding? I had the name in my mind already. I was ready to go. There's a couple names. Miles Harden from South Dakota is a smaller one. I'm a little bit higher on him than the consensus. He's very aggressive as a slot defender. I think he'd be a starting nickel. He's very fluid for his size, being around 5'9", almost 200 pounds. He's strong in support. He's a good playmaker. I think right away you can get a guy who's got that technical. He's just very natural, technically. For some guys, it's a little less natural to flip their hips and stay tight on their pedal, but Miles Harden really shows the ability to do that. And then I like that in tandem with the aggressiveness. But my top option here is Blake Watson from Memphis. And if you follow me on Twitter, I've tweeted about this guy a couple times now. Yeah. But I think in the 2024 NFL draft running back class, this class more than most is really a pick your poison type of class. It's really, it's very subjective, the rankings. So pick your flavor. If you like Marshawn Lloyd, if you like Dylan Lobby, if you like Isaiah Johnson, if you like Jalen Wright, rank that guy as RB4 or RB5, no matter what. It's a very pick your flavor type. And Blake Watson is my flavor. 5'9", 200. He's got very good contact balance for his size, but really fluid runner as well. And I think one of the knocks that I had is I wasn't sure he was an elite athlete on the film. And then he tested with a 4.4 40-yard dash, a 41-inch vertical. It's like, all right, Blake, that'll play. That'll
work.
That'll work for sure. So I think it's one of those things where, functionally, he has all the mobility that you want. He's very fluid, and he's a really good receiving back, man. He caught over 50 passes in 2023, but there was a year even earlier where he caught over 70 passes at Old Dominion, I believe. So he's one of those guys who has that receiving versatility for the modern NFL, but he also has the running ability. He's fluid, but even more than that, one of the most patient runners that I've seen in this cycle, where he can wait for the right hole and then he can be decisive hitting that hole too. So Blake Watson, big fan. I think on the consensus board, he's 234th. He is 139th on my board. So I would take him early day 3. I think he's got the receiving ability, the running ability to be a true, valuable presence in running back rotation in the modern NFL.
Okay, well, I think I'll definitely be watching where Blake Watson ends it there. I mean, I need dynasty running backs on my dynasty roster, so I'll be definitely looking for Blake Watson in his landing spot tomorrow. I think that's our show, Ian. I think we've covered just about every aspect of what can go down tomorrow. Of course, we've got 6 rounds after that we barely got into here, but it's going to be a very long weekend, but a very fun weekend, I think, with a lot going on. Everyone, thank you who tuned in to watching this tonight. We'll be doing more stuff like this going forward about the draft and a recap and free agency and all that moving forward. Please do come to Pro Football Network over these next 3 days to look at everything that we're doing. Ian and the draft staff are going to be grading every single pick that comes in over the next 3 days. Ian, I don't know when you're going to be sleeping, but I'm not sure when that's going to happen. Maybe after the draft is what that's for. The NFL team, we're going to be grading any trades, talking big picture stuff. Adam Beasley's going to be on site covering the Dolphins. Jerry Morrison's going to be on site covering the Bengals. It's going to be wall-to-wall draft coverage, so please do come check that out over the next 3 days. Ian, I got to ask you one question, though. What are you going to do when this is all over? Like, is there something you're going to do to go celebrate? Is it just like a 12-hour like hibernation moment? Like, what is it? Is it going out to the bars? Like, what is going to go down once round 7 is fully over for Ian Cummings?
Hibernation sounds good. I can't lie. I might, turn my inner bear on and just hibernate, find a cave or something. No, I don't know. I'm a pretty mellow guy. I think I'll probably just collapse and sleep for 12 hours. That sounds nice, but I'm definitely taking a vacation at some point mid-May. I think I'm going to visit a buddy in Wisconsin. So that's on the radar, but we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna roll over to 2025 actually on the MDS. So we'll have that prepared when the draft is over. We're gonna be getting preliminary work done on scouting reports for 2025. The grind never rests, but at some point I do want to hibernate and actually sleep, catch those Z's, and then take a slight vacation. I know we could both use one, but we still got a ways to go. We're on the home stretch, but there's 3 more days to really see what happens and lock this thing in.
We can see the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Yes,
we're
that's
getting
the
there. So,
thing. Yep.
But we don't want to zoom through this because this is going to be so much fun the next 3 days. Like I am looking forward to it. I look forward to this time every single year, and I'm sure anyone who's watching this is too. So again, thank you all for watching, and please check out Pro Football Network over the next 3 days for our wall-to-wall coverage of the draft. Thanks for watching this live stream preview of the 2024 NFL Draft.